Story 1.
My cheating wife hired a hitman to kill me, but I outsmarted her and now she faces justice in prison. I despise the regular gatherings at the county club. Every few weeks, it felt like there were countless excuses for hosting some frivolous party where a bunch of wealthy individuals could indulge in their egos, while my wife, Sandra, eagerly anticipated these events. Unfortunately, over the past year or so, her drinking had escalated, leading to moments where she embarrassed herself or me. Sandra and I had been married for 24 years and had 3 college-age children. We first met while I was pursuing my MBA, and we hit it off immediately. Our relationship began to cool off about a decade ago, and I assumed it was a natural progression, although I wished for more affection and closeness. I hesitated to push the issue and resigned myself to the idea that our future together might lack romance. Despite this, I had a fulfilling career and earned a substantial income that comfortably supported our family, even with the financial strain of putting our kids through college. Sandra didn't work, preferring to focus on community service and social engagements. Her lifestyle was sustained by my income, which necessitated financial stability. Despite her dedication to upkeep, I noticed she maintained her appearance well, likely due to frequent trips to the spa and salon. Meanwhile, I considered myself average, sporting a slight paunch and graying hair, though I dressed sharply thanks to the demands of my job and my wife's penchant for shopping. I excelled at my job, but deep down, I wasn't content. I yearned for something different, something fulfilling that didn't hinge on its paycheck. Additionally, I craved a change of scenery. Our house felt too large for just the 2 of us, and I loathed the expenses and time required to maintain it. Yet my wife adamantly dismissed any discussion of such radical ideas. She was enamored with her grand residence, the country club scene, and her affluent circle of friends. During one such social gathering, I meandered through the club, engaging in trivial conversations, feeling detached. As the night wore on, I lingered over my final drink while Sandra seemed to be ramping up her drinking. Her excessive indulgence was evident, particularly as she conversed with a group of local ladies. Approaching the scene, I overheard their discussion veering toward love-making topics, prompting me to retreat discreetly. Just as I was about to leave, Sandra's voice rang out louder than usual. "Hell, if it wasn't for Todd Mitchell, I would never have had any good lovemaking in my lifetime," she exclaimed, oblivious to my presence. The sudden hush that fell over the group indicated they had noticed me nearby. Caught off guard, Sandra turned to see me, her judgment clouded by the drinks. "Robert, I didn't realize you were here. You weren't meant to hear that, darling. I apologize, my mistake," she followed, with a few tipsy giggles, reminiscent of a young girl. The nearby ladies seemed unsure how to respond. Some quietly departed, while the rest remained silent. Sandra shot me a playful smirk, suggesting mischief. Setting my glass down, I exited the room and the club at a leisurely pace. Instead of heading home, I made my way to the airport and within 30 minutes boarded a commuter flight to Reno. I found Reno much more appealing than Las Vegas, shedding light on my relationship with Sandra. During my time in Reno, I gained insights that had previously eluded me. A weekend there promised further clarity. I switched off my cell phone and easily secured a room at one of the casinos, opening an account with $20,000 and swiftly earning a complimentary room. One interesting aspect of casino accounts is their exemption from federal regulations. No reports are mandated to the government for deposits, while substantial winnings must be reported. Deposited funds remain untraceable. Though not particularly interested in gambling, I admired their banking system. When I woke up Saturday at noon, I pondered my circumstances over a burger and fries. Reno appealed to me. Its comfortable climate, due to high altitude, gaming scene, and proximity to various amenities. Taking a stroll by the Truckee River, I reflected on failed marriages. While not contemplating a Reno divorce, I entertained the idea of tossing my ring into the riverbed someday. As I made my way back to the hotel casino, I noticed a real estate office adorned with various pictures in the front display window. Suddenly, the idea of owning a condo in Reno seemed sensible. Spending an hour in the office and another 2 driving around, I stumbled upon a small furnished unit that appealed to me. However, purchasing it while married posed a challenge. Fortunately, I arranged a discreet lease to buy agreement with a substantial deposit, a concept I initiated and the seller embraced. Taking charge of the family finances early in my marriage proved to be one of my best decisions. Sandra lacked financial acumen, content to leave bill payments to me while enjoying spending. That evening, I treated myself to a delightful sushi dinner before retiring for the night. I deposited an additional $10,000 from my Visa card into the casino fund. Despite the detested cash advance fee, a sacrifice I deemed worthwhile. The The next morning, I rose early and savored breakfast at the casino restaurant, relishing eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. While leisurely sipping my second cup of coffee, I noticed my waitress sporting a noticeable black eye. Despite her attempt to conceal it, her efforts were futile. She appeared to be a pleasant woman in her mid-40 seconds, but her eagerness seemed slightly forced, suggesting she was new to the job. Although lacking the finesse of a seasoned waitress, her determination to excel impressed me. "Your name tag says Donna. Is that your real name?" I inquired. "No, my name is Dora, but Donna was the closest tag they had," she replied. "Well, Dora, I'll take another cup of coffee, and I promise a generous tip if you share the story behind the black eye." "Why don't I pour you a refill, and you can leave a smaller tip while I overlook your question," she countered. "Fair enough. It was impolite of me to pry," I conceded. Since I already had the condo key, I decided to gather some essentials to start setting up home. My first stop was the Silver Spur used car lot down the street, where I snagged a well-worn Focus sedan. Although it had seen its fair share of miles, it would suffice for local errands, even though I wouldn't trust it for long trips. Renting was an option, but I anticipated frequent returns, so I opted to buy. With a couple $100s, I managed to acquire everything I needed for comfortable living, including a few changes of clothes. The remainder of the day was spent opening accounts at multiple casinos. I wrote checks payable to the respective casinos, and the funds vanished into my account without leaving a trace. By day's end, I had deposited $660,000 across 4 different casinos. I kept track of these transactions in a small pocket-sized notebook, recording the amounts, dates, and casino names. This served as a chronological record of my gambling losses over the weekend, despite not having wagered a cent. Given my reputation as a poor poker player, any losses in roulette, craps, or blackjack would be plausible. With 6 months to gather the down payment for the condo, I anticipated no issues. Hunger caught up with me as I realized I'd forgotten about lunch. By dinner time, I was famished. Opting for the casino restaurant where I had breakfast, I was greeted by Dora, my waitress, once again. "You're still here? Seems like a long day," I remarked. "I have to work double shifts to make ends meet. Rent turned out to be higher than expected here." "Care for a drink?" she replied. Preferring not to pry, I placed my order and maintained polite conversation. When she brought the check, she paused for a moment. "I apologize for my attitude this morning. I'm struggling to adjust to this place, and I'm feeling self-conscious about my eye. It's a parting gift from my husband when I mentioned divorce. Hopefully, it's the last. Thank you for the generous tip at breakfast." "It really helps," she explained, her smile tinged with sadness. Her words lingered in my mind throughout the night. That evening, I realized there wasn't much more I could do immediately. I needed to return home to attend to a few matters before proceeding further. Securing a flight back was no trouble, but I was uncertain about my plans upon arrival. The next morning, Dora was serving at the diner, and I managed to get one of her tables. When she brought the check after the meal, I approached her. "I have a small predicament, and I was wondering if you could assist me. I must leave today and won't be back for a week or so. I need someone to house sit for me. It's a 2-bedroom condo, so there won't be any living conflicts. Would you be able to help me out? It'll be for at least a couple of months." "Are you serious?" she asked. "No strings attached. I hate leaving the place unattended most of the time." "It'll be just you, and when I'm there, I'll stay out of your way, I promise," I reassured her, though in truth, I didn't mind if someone cleaned the place out. I couldn't let Dora know that. "Okay, is it within walking distance of the diner?" she inquired. "It's pretty close, but I'm leaving you my car also. Ensure it always has gas for when I return." "I'll call you in advance, there's a machine on the phone," I explained. Dora seemed hesitant, perhaps fearing it was a setup, but I didn't have time to convince her otherwise. "Here's the condo key and the car key. The car's parked there, it's a dark blue Ford Focus. Here's the condo address. If you're not comfortable with it, don't worry. I'll retrieve the keys when I return next Friday," I said, jotting down the address on a napkin and handing it to her. She accepted the napkin and keys, still uncertain. "Dora, don't stress about it. If you're not up for it, it's okay. If you decide against it, that's fine too," I reassured her. An hour later, I boarded my flight home. Although I would have preferred to stay in Reno, I drove by the house after retrieving my car from the long-term lot. Seeing Sandra's car gone, I quickly packed a few essentials for the week: underwear, clothes, shoes, and my laptop, which took less than 10 minutes. I also retrieved my passport and birth certificate. The company had a few kitchenette-style units available for use, and my position allowed me to utilize one as needed. I booked it for the next 2 weeks and began charging my laptop battery before calling my eldest son, Jason. I explained to him that his mother and I were experiencing some domestic issues, and that I would be occupied for a while. I asked him to convey this to his sisters at Auburn University and reassure them not to worry. Despite all three of them being enrolled there, I still had to pay out-of-state tuition, though thankfully I could afford it. After hanging up, I plugged my cell phone in to charge and took a shower. The only sustenance I had on the plane was a bag of peanuts, so I eagerly anticipated a satisfying dinner. Monday proved to be a hectic day. Prior to anything else, I visited the bank and secured a substantial second mortgage on the house, surpassing its current value. By the end of the month, this situation would change. Directly from the bank, I reached out to Auburn University and arranged prepaid tuition for my children, wiring $240,000 to the school. This left me with a cashier's check of just over $200,000 to take to Reno. I cashed in 2 CDs, paying the penalties, and closed out my money market account. I opted to leave the credit cards untouched until the month's end. Realizing I was already running late for work, my loyal secretary greeted me with black coffee and a knowing smile. "Good morning, Mr. Terrell. Are you going to fill me in on what happened at the county club on Friday, or should I just believe the rumors?" she quipped. "Emily, the rumors are all accurate. Anything else you need to know?" I replied without hesitation. She responded, "What do you need me to do to assist?" "Get me all the information you can find on Todd Mitchell. I believe he used to work here, but I'm not certain. Arrange for my scheduled work to be handled by the staff and ensure any appointments or meetings I've set up remain unchanged. Any questions so far?" Emily left the office with a broad smile and a thumbs up, ready to tackle the tasks ahead. Initially, I had anticipated it would take several weeks to sort out my affairs, but now I realized it could all be wrapped up within a week. I promptly called my lawyer and scheduled an immediate appointment. Before leaving, I instructed Emily that I would neither be accepting nor returning any phone calls from my wife, and security was instructed not to permit her entry into the building. Jerry Proctor, a college friend of mine, was never fond of Sandra, making him the ideal candidate to handle my divorce. "I was at the country club on Friday, Robert, so I think I understand why you're here," Jerry remarked. "You're correct. I'm not trying to be sarcastic, Bob, but it's time you were right again. I thought I could endure it as long as I wasn't publicly embarrassed, but that changed on Friday. I need access to all your accounts and a couple of powers of attorney. I'll have my assistant prepare everything and give you a call. Is there anything specific I should be aware of?" I responded, "Well, Jerry, unfortunately, the events of Friday triggered something in me. I've developed a gambling dependence. I spent the weekend in Reno and lost a significant amount of money. I'm going back next weekend, and I fear it will be even worse," I confessed. "Gee, that's terrible, buddy. I assume you're keeping records of all these losses?" Jerry replied with a grin. "I have been, and I will continue to do so. It might be wise for me to send you copies of everything," I agreed. "Absolutely. You know, Bob, I don't think we should discuss this further," Jerry suggested. "You're right. Do you need anything else?" I inquired. "I'm good, Bob. Get out of here and handle your business," Jerry advised, handing me a financial worksheet to fill out before my next visit to sign the forms. It was then that I realized I had skipped lunch. Emily had a helpful sheet prepared for me, providing information about Todd Mitchell. She suggested I speak with Wilma Grimm in the personnel department before proceeding. Wilma, a longtime employee, always exuded confidence with her business. Suits and tightly pulled-back bun, making her slightly intimidating to anyone who encountered her. If Emily thought it was necessary for me to meet with her, it must be important. "Good afternoon, Mr. Terrell. Please have a seat," she greeted me, attempting to put me at ease, though it wasn't quite successful. It felt akin to being in a room with a strict nun teacher. Despite my status as a grown man in a significant position, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by this woman. She closed her office door before speaking. Emily briefed me on the situation. I don't indulge in office gossip, but I deal strictly in facts. 3 years ago, Todd Mitchell confided in me. I swore to keep his disclosures confidential. Unfortunately, it seems I can no longer honor that pledge. If anything I say offends you, feel free to leave, and our discussion will end. If you disagree with what you hear, direct your frustration elsewhere. I'm merely presenting the facts. Do you comprehend, Mr. Terrell? She stated firmly. Yes, I understand. I believe I can handle whatever you disclose without resorting to a temper tantrum, I replied, attempting a light-hearted remark, though it was met with a slight frown from her. Approximately 3.5 years ago, your wife Sandra approached Todd Mitchell at a company event. There was heavy drinking that night, and before it concluded, Todd and Sandra engaged in carnal activity in one of the private offices. Todd was set to marry the following month. Sandra threatened to reveal their affair to his fiancée unless he continued their liaison. He hoped that once he married, she would cease her demands, but she persisted, coercing him into continued carnal encounters for several months under the threat of exposure. In a state of desperation, Todd sought my assistance. Naturally, he had to divulge the entire ordeal. Ethically, I couldn't disclose this information to you or anyone else. The best solution I could devise was to transfer Todd to another office. After relocating to Dallas, Sandra ceased her advances. Todd never disclosed the situation to his wife. Do you have any questions? It appears Mr. Mitchell was as much a sufferer in this debacle as anyone else. Initially, I contemplated some form of retribution, but that now seems imprudent. Any suggestions, Miss Grimm? Now that you're aware of your influence, I suggest letting the matter rest. Todd Mitchell is a valuable employee and an asset to the company. Don't jeopardize his career over something your wife initiated, she recommended. Thank you for your time. I agree with you. Being coerced into closeness with my wife is punishment in itself. As we rose, Wilma smiled, adding, By the way, it's not Miss. I've been married for 32 years. It was difficult to envision Wilma Grimm in a lovemaking setting with a man. However, perhaps when she lets her guard down, she transforms into a sort of lovemaking symbol. Suddenly, thoughts of a dominatrix crossed my mind, prompting me to shift focus. I had more pressing matters than Wilma's romantic life. Emily had rearranged my schedule, leaving me with a clean slate. Despite my wife's persistent calls insisting I wasn't in Baltimore, I remained undeterred, as Emily had suggested. I had an appointment with the company president the next day and one with the legal department that afternoon. I invited Emily to join me for supper, but she declined, citing her husband's disapproval. She jokingly proposed I ask Wilma instead. The meeting in the legal department took longer than expected, resulting in me retaining a few individuals over time. I extended apologies, which were met with understanding. Redeeming my retirement plan for a cash settlement proved challenging. Closing the shared savings account went smoothly, but required time for processing. Dealing with my sick time, vacation time, and company insurance, however, was relatively straightforward compared to other tasks. It had become quite evident by then that I would be departing from the company. I hoped the news wouldn't reach my wife prematurely. I ended up dining alone, strangely finding my thoughts drifting to Dora during the meal. I pondered whether she had moved into the condo and if she was still working double shifts. Despite my limited acquaintance with her, I felt a keen desire to return to Reno and see her. Recognizing the juvenile nature of these thoughts, I attempted to dismiss them. It was imprudent to waste time pondering fantasies that would never materialize. The following morning, I cashed in 2 whole life insurance policies and terminated 2 term policies. I was astounded by the substantial cash value the whole life policies had accrued. I arranged to collect the checks the following day. While my car was covered by company insurance, I canceled the insurance on Sandra's Lexus, as the lease was under her name, while the insurance was under mine. Before heading to work, I dropped by Jerry's office, submitted the financial form, and signed several papers his secretary had prepared. Upon my return to the office, Emily had coffee ready. I don't mean to add insult to injury, boss, but you should speak with Calvin Bosk down in settlements before meeting with Richard, she advised. Richard Ryder, the company president, likely already knew the purpose of my visit. The settlements division was situated in the basement, an odd arrangement compared to the other department's locations. Enjoying natural light and windows, while they were relegated to what felt like a dungeon. Calvin, Emily mentioned you wanted to speak with me, I greeted Calvin Bosk, a reserved individual who always efficiently completed his tasks. He led me to a secluded area. I've heard rumblings about tensions in your office. I'm not one for gossip, but I felt you should be aware of something. About 6 years ago, we had a colleague named Raymond Upright. He was a decent guy, married with 2 children. He became entangled with your wife after an office event. She persistently contacted him at home and in the office. He regretted his actions and attempted to end the affair, but she wouldn't allow it, threatening to expose him to his wife if he tried to break it off. Foolishly, he called her bluff. 2 days later, Raymond's wife threw him out. He spiraled into drunkenness and lost his job. I'm uncertain of his current whereabouts. Nonetheless, Raymond's wife threatened to disclose your wife's affair to you. Allegedly, your wife paid her $10,000 to remain silent. I lack concrete evidence regarding this last detail. Thanks, Cal. I hope I didn't upset you, Mr. Terrell, but Emily suggested I inform you. You made the right call. I appreciate it, I acknowledged. I rode the elevator straight to the 9th floor, arriving a bit early for my appointment with Mr. Ryder. Nonetheless, he promptly ushered me in. The meeting was brief and to the point. The legal department, personnel department, and payroll would handle everything for me. Once the details were sorted out, I was instructed to personally contact Mr. Ryder from wherever I was. He handed me a card with his private cell number on the back. There were no assurances, no regrets, and no nonsense. While some matters were resolved, Others remained open-ended. I simply nodded and departed without uttering a word. Emily greeted me with a wide smile upon my return to the office. As she handed me my usual cup of coffee, I returned the smile and instructed her to book me a flight to Reno for Thursday morning. With a 2-hour layover in Dallas, she gestured for me to look out the window. Sandra was in the parking lot, engaged in a heated argument with the security guard. She's been down there for over 20 minutes. They won't let her in, and she refuses to leave. What do you want to do, boss? It seems the guards have the situation handled. My only concern now is finding someone to have dinner with. I dislike dining alone, I remarked. I called Jerry to check on things. He informed me he couldn't take action until I resolved the financial mess. Currently, I was financially stable, with the incoming checks and cash in the bank. I was rather affluent. I assured Jerry I would head to Reno early and not return until I was penniless. Periodically, someone would pop their head into my office, informing me that my wife wanted me to call her. She had her friends call their husbands at work in an attempt to locate me. I lingered in the office for a few more hours, tidying up to ease the transition for my replacement. Sandra sat on the hood of my car, awaiting my exit. Emily flashed a smile as she handed over the keys to her Honda Civic. She mentioned it was a good excuse to have her husband pick her up and treat her to dinner. By the way, you're not planning anything reckless in Dallas, are you? Nope, just wrapping up loose ends. No revenge, I assure you. I drove to Allentown and grabbed dinner at the Outback. I was back in my apartment before midnight. The following morning flew by. I signed more paperwork for Jerry, closed all the bank accounts, and canceled all the credit cards. I even arranged to have the utilities shut off at the house the next week. I collected checks from the bank, insurance company, and workplace. I was surprised to find out I was worth so much. I got a new cell phone and canceled the ones my wife and I had. I sold my country club membership to an old friend for $23,000. My replacement was already in position when I made my final stop at work. He appeared to be a nice guy, and he had arrived from Boston with just 24 hours' notice. He understood it was a smart move for him. Emily was more knowledgeable about office operations than I was, so training him wasn't necessary. There were a few items at the house I wished I had, but they weren't significant enough for me to return. Emily told me to keep her car, and her husband would pick it up at the airport. I bought a couple of cheap suitcases to pack my belongings from the apartment. Anything I forgot, I could purchase in Reno. Suddenly, it dawned on me that I had completed everything I needed to do. All my assets were now in cash. There were no stocks, no accounts, and nothing else of value except the house, which I was gifting to my wife. Airblue was accommodating. They had available seats and were happy to move up my flight. I called Jerry at home. Hey buddy, just wanted to let you know I'm leaving tonight. I assume you have everything you need? I'm all set, Bob. I can serve the papers tomorrow, but I still need that financial info as soon as possible. You might as well give them to her. I'll start sending proof of financial irresponsibility soon. Be cautious, Bob. I don't want either of us in trouble. Sandra will probably get a fancy lawyer, maybe from Philly. He might bail if things go south. It's up to you. Jerry, do your best for me, but keep the bill reasonable. I'll be strapped for cash soon. Don't forget that. One more thing. Look into a guy named Raymond Upright. He might need a hand. Depending on the situation, I might be the one to help. Got it, Bobby. Safe travels, and keep in touch. I called the condo and left a message on the machine about my arrival later that night. I reassured her I'd call and not to be alarmed by someone at the door. At this point, I didn't know if she'd be there. I hoped so. It was strange. I hardly knew her, yet I hoped for some kind of relationship. For now, friendship would suffice. Her vulnerability made me cautious not to exploit it. I reached Dallas early enough for a leisurely breakfast. I was waiting in Todd Mitchell's office when he arrived, visibly displeased. Mr. Terrell, I'd say it's nice to see you, but that'd be a lie. We both know it. Relax. Todd, I hope you don't mind the informality. I'm not here to reprimand you. I wanted to let you know I understand your situation from before, and there are no hard feelings. You could have done that over the phone. I know, but I was passing through and felt it was worth my time to clear the air. I don't get it. Why bother? I messed up. I should be apologizing to you. You're not solely to blame. I was foolish too. I'm too ashamed to even tell my wife. You played a part, but most of the trouble was caused by my wife. What she did caused problems for you, and now for me. I'm not excusing you entirely, but I don't want you carrying more guilt than necessary because my dear wife was unfaithful. That's very kind of you to put it that way. I'm at a loss for words or actions in response. I reached over and passed him one of Jerry's cards. Later today, give my lawyer a ring. There's a chance he might need your help. It'll be kept confidential. He might say he doesn't need anything. At most, he might ask for a notarized statement confirming the affair. I assure you it won't reach your wife. We shook hands as I stood up, an odd gesture given his betrayal, but it felt appropriate. Todd Mitchell was a decent man who didn't deserve his life to be ruined over a mistake, even if it was repeated. An hour later, I was on my flight back to Reno, pondering where I went wrong. I had worked tirelessly to provide for my family. I thought I did a commendable job, yet while I ensured everyone's well-being, I neglected my wife. In situations like this, we often search for our own faults. Usually I find myself to blame, and I can accept that. But when it comes to Sandra's infidelity, it's a betrayal I cannot justify or excuse. Had she been discreet, perhaps I would have shouldered the blame and let it go. But her lack of discretion absolves me of guilt. The evening concluded on a positive note. Upon landing at Reno Tahoe International, I was pleasantly surprised to find Dora waiting at baggage claim. She wore jeans and a light blue Oxford shirt, a departure from her usual uniform. I hadn't intended for her to pick me up when I called. I simply wanted her to be aware of my arrival. "Good evening, Dora. I didn't expect to see you. I thought since I had your car, it was the least I could do. Aren't you on duty?" "No, I managed to cut back, thanks to your kind offer." "Oh, I wasn't being kind. I was just trying to find a way for us to be alone." "And what do you plan to do when you have me alone?" "I'm not sure yet. I haven't thought that far ahead. Any suggestions?" As I retrieved my luggage from the carousel, I noticed Dora blush slightly. It seemed like a cue to dial back before I scared her off. Her teasing question indicated she was comfortable enough to joke, which was a positive sign. 30 minutes later, we returned to a freshly decorated apartment. It was adorned with small touches. That didn't break the bank, but significantly enhanced the overall ambiance. In gratitude for her efforts in sprucing up the apartment and picking me up at the airport, I treated us to 2 prime rib dinners. It seemed Dora enjoyed the wine more than the beef. "How's the divorce proceeding?" "Pretty poorly. I still have 3 weeks left before I can even file. You need 6 weeks to establish residency." Despite what everyone said, I thought this would be straightforward. I probably would have been better off handling it from home. "Why didn't you?" Dora paused, fiddling with her food before looking up. Getting away from Tony was more crucial than getting the divorce. The divorce is just a piece of paper that won't shield me from further misuse. I think I used the divorce as an excuse to justify coming out here. The location wasn't important. What mattered was that I left. Dora's explanation resonated with me. Initially, divorcing Sandra seemed significant, but now I wasn't so sure. All I truly wanted was to prevent her from benefiting from the marriage. Unless I had intentions of remarriage, which I didn't, it didn't matter. The remainder of the evening was spent discussing more mundane topics like hobbies, movies, and books. Dora didn't have children, and I didn't inquire further. We slept in separate bedrooms that night. Dora had already left for work by the time I woke up. Fresh coffee awaited me, and that was all I needed. I still felt full from last night's indulgence. After a quick shower, I got down to business. "Jerry, how's my favorite attorney holding up?" There was a sigh from the other end of the line. "Not worth a dime, Robert. I've got some bad news for you. Can you promise not to shoot the messenger?" "Oh geez, I've only been away for 1 day. What happened?" "Sandra's caused quite a stir. She found out about the bank accounts and other things. After contacting the police, she managed to secure a restraining order against just about everything. All your accounts are frozen, even though they're empty. You're forbidden from coming near her or the house, taking anything from the house, or contacting your children, even though they're legally adults. Most of it seems like nonsense, but sorting it all out will take a lot of time and money if you want to fix it. She even contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission about your 401k and retirement accounts. Somehow she's got the IRS looking into things too. Jerry, I don't know how to say this, but I want no part of any of it. I'm done. Do you understand?" "I hear you loud and clear, buddy. Just so you know, she's also hired a private investigator to track you down. I wonder how she plans to pay for all this." "Don't know, and I don't care. Remember, if the cops or feds ask me where you are, I'll have to tell them. I won't risk my career for you, even though we're friends." "I get it, Jerry. Protect yourself. I'll make some adjustments on my end. I won't be calling you again for a while. Thanks for your standing, buddy." Well, that throws a wrench in the works. Even the best laid plans can go awry in a flash. I had to switch to plan B, and I didn't even have one. My brilliant idea to pretend to lose all my money in the casinos was shot down. I decided not to reach out to anyone else. Fortunately, Dora left me the car, which was a relief. I don't know how she got to work. I was left with a small duffel bag full of money and checks. I had to visit 6 different casinos to cash all my checks and exchange them for chips or credit. I was hesitant to go to the banks in case there was a hold or trace on anything. The casinos were more than willing to assist. By the end of the morning, I had everything deposited at several places in a bag filled with cash and chips. After a quick lunch, I initiated the withdrawals. Within 2 hours, all the chips had been exchanged for cash, and all the cash had been withdrawn from the casino accounts. I now possessed a substantial amount of money, and there were no problems or suspicious occurrences thus far. It took me under an hour to drive to Carson City. There, I rented a large safety deposit box at a small, inconspicuous bank and stored everything except $55,000, which I kept for incidental expenses. With everything now secure, I looked forward to another leisurely dinner with Dora to celebrate. I had a hunch something was amiss. Upon entering the condo, Dora was scrambling to rectify things that shouldn't have been disturbed in the first place. She immediately looked up at me, partly covering her face. "I'm sorry, Robert. It's my fault. I don't know how he found me, and I didn't realize he was following me until I arrived at the apartment. I should have been more cautious. I'm truly sorry." Gently, I lowered her hand from her face. Dora sported a new black eye and a swollen lip, along with a large bluish bruise on her right cheek. "Was it Tony?" She nodded, confirming. "He had his 2 brothers with him. They're out searching for you now. Tony instructed me not to leave the condo." "Where are they searching?" I gave them the names of 3 casinos. "They're clueless about your appearance. They're not thinking clearly." It was obvious we couldn't stay, and involving the police wasn't an option. We left everything behind, headed west, and spent the night at a small off-road motel in Grass Valley. Despite there being only 1 bed, I acted chivalrously. I brought takeout to the room and bought some makeup for Dora. She did her best to conceal the bruises, but it was still noticeable. She apologized profusely throughout the night. I felt relieved when she finally fell asleep. The next day, we drove to Sacramento to buy clothing and personal items. I had no idea when we could return to the condo. I had booked the Grass Valley Motel for 2 additional nights. Over the next few days, Dora and I got acquainted. There was no closeness or suggestive remarks. After just 3 days, I felt more at ease with her than I did with my wife of 24 years. While I wasn't conversing with Dora, I fretted over the unfolding events. I was hesitant to bring Dora back, fearing Tony might find her. Similarly, I was apprehensive about returning myself, concerned that someone might be searching for me. Yet, carelessly, I left behind my laptop, passport, and other personal documents at the condo. Foolishly, I deemed them significant and felt compelled to retrieve them. Truly foolish. Despite only knowing Dora for a short time, I felt compelled to trust her. We were both in the same predicament regarding our spouses. "Have you ever been to Mexico?" "No, I haven't." "Are we considering going to Mexico, Robert?" "I'm uncertain, but in case things take a turn for the worse, I need you to do something for me. I don't want you getting into trouble, and I want to keep you safe from Tony." "Robert, you don't owe me anything. You've already done more than enough. I'll manage." "Well, I'm not certain about my own situation. I've stashed away a significant amount of money. It's clean money, but I'm hiding it from my wife. If anything happens to me, I need you to retrieve the cash for me." "Who's after you? You haven't mentioned anything about that. Did you do something illegal?" "There are multiple federal agencies and a private detective looking for me. If necessary, the local police will likely get involved. All I'm trying to do is safeguard some money for my wife." "What should I do with this money?" "I've been pondering that. Head to Guadalajara and wait for me there. Use whatever funds you need until I arrive." "How will you locate me?" "Visit the Libertad market for coffee every morning." "I'll find you. It's sizable, but I'll find you." "When should I do this?" "When you realize I'm in trouble." "Why not do it now?" "Be patient. I'll bring you along. I'd prefer us to go together rather than separately. It feels safer that way." "Why can't we both leave now?" The conversation began to loop, so I disregarded her. I didn't intend to be rude, just eager to proceed. 2 hours later, we crossed the pass and arrived in Carson City. Dora's name was added to the access for the safety deposit box, and she received her own key. Upon returning to the condo, I parked half a block away. The complex had a lower-level parking area beneath the units, open but covered. I instructed Dora to wait in the car until I confirmed there wouldn't be any issues. What kind of problem? I had no clue. Given recent events, anything was possible, and it unfolded as I wandered through the parking lot. "Robert Terrell, turn around." He was a slight man, somewhat wiry. The lengthy leather coat he sported seemed more odd than menacing. He lacked the demeanor to pull it off. However, the sizable black Weapon in his grip compensated. Do we know each other? A broad grin stretched across his face as if he took pride in revealing his identity. I'm Lo, your wife sent me. All right, what do you need from me? I require your wedding ring and your wallet. The wedding ring I understand, but why the wallet? I need to make it seem like a robbery. Make what appear as a robbery? Your wife hired me to eliminate you, Mr. Terrell. I hope she paid up front because she's broke. What do you mean? That marked the end of our dialogue. From afar, 3 burly Italians, clad in lengthy leather coats, emerged. Bobby Terrell, we need to have a word with you. Tony was particularly vocal. Their abrupt arrival caught Lo off guard. As they noticed the firearm in his hand, all 3 reached for their own concealed weapons. I hurled myself over the concrete barrier toward the exterior of the parking lot. Lo temporarily lost interest in me as I dashed along the building's side toward the car. Gunfire reverberated off the garage walls. Glancing up, I spotted Dora racing down the street and 2 suited men exiting a black SUV across the way. It was evident they were federal agents, presumably awaiting my arrival. The shootout provided a distraction, allowing me to flee the area. Dora and the car were nowhere to be seen. There was no chance I was returning to that condo. I didn't care who shot whom in the parking garage. I just wanted out. What I knew for certain was that 3 different factions were after me for various reasons. It was clear to me that I needed to lay low for a while. While I had over $4 grand on hand, catching a bus to Carson City to retrieve my money wasn't a viable option. I was too much of a target at the moment. Yeah, hot is the right word for it. I was just trying to escape from a wife who betrayed me. What had gone wrong? Why was my wife attempting to have me eliminated? Perhaps she hadn't realized there was no longer any insurance payout. I had overestimated her intelligence. That was my blunder. So I took a bus to San Francisco. A grand doesn't stretch far in the city by the bay. The first 1,000 secured me a social security number and an ID, allowing me to seek employment. I found a modest room with shared facilities and landed a job as a waiter in a discreet eatery. After about a month, I was earning enough to sustain myself and was becoming quite adept at waiting tables. Some patrons even requested my section. I hadn't kept up with my cell phone payments, and the service had been cut off since leaving Reno. I hadn't used it anyway. It only cost me a few bucks to set up a new prepaid service with 50 minutes of airtime. I wanted to reach out to Dora, but I had no clue where she was. So I decided to call Jerry. Hey Jerry, it's Robert. Just wanted to touch base. Bobby, good to hear from you. Things are still chaotic, but not quite as you might expect. Where the heck are you? None of your business where I am. Last time we spoke, I was besieged by unsavory characters, all wanting something. Am I still a marked man? Well, most of that mess cleared up, especially after Sandra got arrested. From what I gather, the IRS is still pursuing payment on 401k assets. Apart from that, things are looking up. What do you mean, Sandra was arrested? I thought you of all people would know about it. Ever heard of a guy named Lester Lowe? Yeah, I briefly met him about 3 months back. He was attempting to off me when we were interrupted by some other fellows who had a bone to pick with me. While they were arguing over who would get a shot at me, I slipped out the back door. How does he tie in? Sandra hired Lowe to take you out. Lowe got seriously injured in Reno and spilled everything to the cops. He claimed Sandra was stiffing him on a $10,000 contract, so he squealed. Believe it or not, the cops bought it and slapped her with charges. She's stuck in jail awaiting trial because she can't make bail. Jerry, I'd consider helping her out if she hadn't tried to have me bumped off. Her parents should bail her out, not me. Let me see what I can do, Bobby. No one seems too interested in you right now. Want me to restart the divorce proceedings? I think we have solid grounds this time. Might as well. Divorce would tidy things up, though I couldn't care less at this point. I've kept all the paperwork. I reckon I can still use most of it. Oh, forgot to mention, your kids all returned home when Sandra got in trouble. They were worried initially, but lost interest once the truth came out. They want you to reach out and reassure them you're okay. I'll contact them as soon as I can. How'd your money laundering plan pan out? Not worth a lick. Lost control and lost touch. I'll try to check on it next week, Jerry. Sometimes even the best laid plans fall flat. Okay, stay in touch, buddy. One more thing, Jerry. Did Sandra ever say why she wanted me dead? Not that I know of. I figured it was for the insurance, unaware that you'd canceled. I touched base with the kids, and everything's fine. They felt better knowing their tuition was prepaid. They were curious about what went down between Sandra and me, but I couldn't bring myself to spill the beans. Some things will have to wait. I borrowed a car and drove up to Carson City. The safety deposit box turned out to be empty. She could have left a note at least. I couldn't really gripe since I gave her the key and access. Did she head to Guadalajara, or did she find a hideout beyond my reach? There was only one way to find out. In my San Francisco neighborhood, there were several small travel agencies, most specializing in group tours for like-minded people, which I didn't quite fit into. Finally, I found a tour to my favorite Mexican city. With a last-minute cancellation, I could snag it. It was the first time I had to scrape together enough money for something. The trip wasn't overly pricey, I just didn't have much cash. I felt at ease since a few guys from the restaurant were on the trip. Most signed up for side trips, but I had other plans. The first 2 days were a letdown. The Libertad market was larger than I anticipated. In hindsight, it wasn't the best choice. I hated to entertain the idea that maybe Dora had taken my money and jetted off somewhere more exotic, perhaps Bangkok or Tahiti. There was enough money in that safety deposit box to live almost anywhere. I was torn between waiting for her to pass by or searching for her. I ended up doing both. By the third day, it was getting dull. "About time, Robert. Where have you been?" I turned and saw Dora, hands on hips, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat with a red band. I didn't say anything. I walked over and kissed her for the first time. Don't know why I hadn't done it earlier. Glad I did now. "That's a pretty lame excuse. Try it again." The second kiss came with a big hug as I lifted her off the ground. "Dora, I missed you so much. You'll have to tell me where you've been for the last month." Later. "Let's go home and have some lunch." We strolled through the market hand in hand. I felt happy and content for the first time in a while. "Robert, don't be mad, but I used some of your money. Most of it's in the bank, but I needed a place to live, so I bought us a house. I hoped you wouldn't mind. With all that money in the bank, it's a beautiful hacienda in a beautiful city, and I'm with a wonderful woman. Love it when a plan comes together." Sandra's parents managed to gather her bail money and cover her legal fees. Jerry easily obtained her signature on the divorce documents. She received a 5 to 8 year sentence for attempting to have me eliminated. The reason behind Todd Mitchell providing a deposition to Jerry remained a mystery, but Jerry never needed to use it. Jerry successfully located Ray Upright, who was sober but struggling. When asked how he could assist, Ray expressed a desire for a hot dog pushcart, which I was able to provide for $2,400. I resolved my issues with the IRS for $4,000. LO is currently incarcerated in Nevada, along with Dora's husband and brothers. The duration of their stay is uncertain. With no legal troubles looming over me, I was free to return home to my old job, now with a promotion awaiting me. Once Dora's Mexican divorce is finalized, we intend to marry. The kids are scheduled to attend the wedding during spring break. While the house in Guadalajara is stunning, we're inclined not to make it our permanent residence. Dora prefers to keep it as a vacation home. Emily eagerly anticipates my return to work, particularly in the new role, which signifies a promotion for both of us. Dora is flexible about our future location as long as we're together. She's keen for me to introduce her to Sandra, which promises to be an interesting encounter. Though my plans didn't unfold as expected, I have no grounds to complain.
Story 2.
Discovered the woman I'm dating is married, so I informed her husband and then ghosted her. So, 4 months ago, I met this woman, she is 29, at my gym, and we pretty much connected instantly. Over the course of 4 months, we became a couple, went on many dates, and had sex plenty of times. I was a virgin before I met her. I never had a girlfriend or sex, and I really felt like life finally kicked in for me and that things would get better. I'm 24, and before I met her, I always felt like a reject and a weirdo because of my lack of success in dating and relationships. The other day, by chance, I found out she has a husband, and I wanted to bury myself on the spot. I felt so bad I can't put it into words. She wanted to have sex after we had a date, but I lied and told her that I couldn't do it that day because I had something planned. I came home, and I was ashamed of myself. I managed to find her husband on social media, and I've been going back and forth on whether and how to reveal everything. I saved all our chats, pictures, and I even have some receipts from our dinners. I talked to my mom about it, and she told me that since I managed to find him, and since I have evidence, I should inform him. My mom told me that he deserves to know, and if it were up to her, she would have revealed everything. But she told me that's my decision to make. I feel like this woman played both me and her husband, and now I hate myself. Am I the a-hole? Has no consensus spot? OP was not the a-hole. Let's get some relevant comments first, though. First up, get tested for STDs. You have no idea how many partners she's had. If it were me, I would tell him. The op replies, "Thank you for the advice. I'm going to do that." As for telling, I've already made the decision to inform her husband about her cheating. Hopefully, I won't be collateral damage in all of this. One other person chimes in, I would message him with correspondence between you two, but nothing overly graphic. Make sure he knows you had no idea and block her everywhere. I am curious, you said you accidentally found out, but how did you find out? You said that you found out by chance, and she wanted to have sex with you after the date. Did she just drop it on you on your date? The op replies, no, she got a call and it said, hubby, with a heart emoji. The two of them were in the picture. The OP had a response on who initiated the relationship, and if he knew she was married, I didn't initiate sex. She did, and she was going too fast for me. I have no relationship or sexual experience. She never said anything about being married or having a boyfriend or husband. You went from virgin to homewrecker in just 4 months. That's like breaking the sound barrier of bad decisions. But hey, you didn't know. But seriously, finding out your girlfriend is married must have felt like winning the lottery, except instead of cash, you hit the jackpot of moral dilemmas. Not to mention she just happened to be the one to take your virginity. Sounds like she definitely took advantage of you here, OP. Update, first post. Am I the a-hole for wanting to reveal my affair partner's cheating to her husband? Short and straight to the point, I used a fake and anonymous account to send him details and some pictures. I also told him that I have more evidence that I would like to share. He didn't respond until yesterday, where he said that he wants to know more. Today, I sent him everything and explained everything in detail. Turns out he already suspected her of cheating. He just didn't have any proof. He wasn't angry or sad, he was just disappointed. A lot. He also thought I would be older. He said that he doesn't blame me, it wasn't my fault. He told me that he owes me big time because he wanted to hire somebody to find out if she was actually cheating, so I actually saved him both time and money. After I explained everything, he was mostly relieved and thanked me for helping him, and asked if there was something he could do to repay me. I said that he should help somebody else, and that will make us even. He thanked me, told me that I'm a good guy, and that was mostly it. He will file for divorce. In case anybody was wondering, I haven't heard from my affair partner for a few days now. And I'm pretty sure he didn't tell her where he got all the proof from because she didn't call and yell at me. I blocked her on everything anyway after my talk with her husband, and it's time to move forward. Crappy experience from a first relationship, but what can you do? The commenters have a thought. Bro, I am so proud of you. You did good, and I'm glad he took it well. Couldn't be happier for this update. The op replies, he was so kind and nice. I felt so bad. I kept apologizing, but he kept saying that he didn't blame me and that it wasn't my fault. Hey, saving the husband the hassle of hiring a private investigator, that's a solid deed, even if it did come with a side order of existential crisis. You did the right thing, Ope. The tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive, or in your case when we accidentally stumble into someone else's web of deceit. How did you find out that your partner was cheating? Let us know in the comments below. Next up, she's just a TRD wife in a TRD life. I don't even know where to begin with this. I'm a 34-year-old male, and my wife, 33, and I have 2 kids together, an 11-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. My wife and I have been together for 12 years and married for 8. Around a year ago, I noticed my wife increasingly sending me these trad wife or traditional housewife TikToks. I have nothing against that type of relationship, but I don't think it makes sense for our current family situation. I do earn quite a bit more than my wife, enough to sustain our family on my own, but I don't see the need to do so. I work 80%, my wife 50%, and besides, Wednesdays, where both of us are working, either one of us is always home for the kids. I could work 100% and let my wife be a stay-at-home mom, but again, both of my kids are attending school, and in my mind, there is no need for my wife to be at home 24/7. She got increasingly pushy about it over the past 2 months. And again, I just kept on telling her that there wasn't any need for that. If we did decide to go down that route, what would she do during the hours my kids attended school? I know damn well our house doesn't need to be cleaned for 6 hours a day. She would constantly try to butter me up with, you would have dinner ready every day when you come home from work. And something about unlimited or some BS like that. Again, in the nicest way possible, I would remind her that our kids weren't toddlers, and our current work-life schedule allowed us to function perfectly fine. We got into a pretty heated argument 2 weeks ago about it, and my wife completely stopped having sex with me to show me what I would be missing out on. She's basically been treating me like a roommate since. I just thought she would get over it and that this was just a phase, but God, was I wrong. I came home from work yesterday and saw a bunch of presents on the dining table. At first, I thought they were all for me since my birthday was in a week, but then I saw the labels on them, addressed to my wife. I read one of the letters attached to the presents. The last sentence on it was literally, "It was such a pleasure working alongside you, and I wish you all the best moving forward." I thought this was some sick prank. A few minutes later, my wife just casually strolled into the living room, acting like nothing was wrong. I guess she saw my mad expression and had the audacity to tell me that I'd get over it. I just lost it. I left without saying another word and went to my parents' house. I feel absolutely disrespected. Why the F would my wife think it was okay to just quit her job without telling me and just expect me to be fine with it? My wife has been bombarding me with texts and calls, demanding to know where I am and that the kids miss me. I just told her to go find a lawyer and that I was done with her, then proceeded to block her. My son just sent me a voicemail, crying and asking why I was divorcing mom and if I was leaving the family. That kind of broke my heart. I haven't responded and honestly don't know what to say to him. My mother-in-law has also been demanding that I return home and apologize to my wife. My parents also seem to be siding with the wife since they are traditional Muslims. My mom also used to be a stay-at-home mom. I feel like I'm wrong for immediately jumping to divorce without hearing her out. And besides this whole job drama, I love my wife too much for this to be the end of our otherwise perfect marriage. But on the other hand, I feel like I've lost complete trust in her. Should I just swallow my pride and let my wife stay at home from now on, or should I follow through on divorcing her? How should I navigate the situation? Am I the a-hole here? Ask for an opinion and you're going to get it. First, some relevant comments about the religion, thank you, but we aren't strict Muslims. Yes, we pray, etc., but we don't follow any of the traditional gender role ideologies. My wife tends to be a bit more on the conservative and traditional side, whereas I'm a bit more liberal. And I mean, doesn't the same apply to Christianity? Go back home. I've told my son I'll be home by tomorrow. I'll just be gone for 2 days. There had to have been red flags earlier than this. I mean, before this, the only red flag I saw was her constantly just ignoring me if we had a disagreement, but usually, that was for maybe max 2 days. This was the first time she did that for a longer period of time. The crux of the issue, the fact that she would come home relaxing, isn't the issue. It's the fact that we now have to significantly cut down on our current expenses, and I'm not even sure if my company is willing to let me work 100%. A commenter says, this tradwife crap is cult-level bat crap crazy. The women who are indebted to tradwife culture out of some desire to be more valued and have fewer outside-of-the-home responsibilities. And the men who encourage women to be or become tradwives out of some weird chauvinist nostalgia for the family dynamics of the 40 seconds and 60 seconds and an insecure need to fully control their wife and household. Are codependent wrecks and borderline sociopaths, respectively. I feel so bad that you've been hit so hard by this. I imagine it'd be like figuring out one of your parents went down the QAnon rabbit hole, or worse. You should split with her, absolutely. Beyond a certain point, there's no reasoning with these people. OP replies, thank you, but I don't think that this post should spread hate to those who currently are, or were, tradwives. It's a completely acceptable type of relationship if both parties agree to it, and that's my primary issue with all of this, there's no consensus. Spot on, may a hole. But the majority of the responses were not the a-hole. Ah, the joys of marital bliss, where every day brings a new surprise. Like finding out your wife has quit a job and taken up a career and surprising the hell out of you. And then there's the classic move of withholding adult fun time to prove a point. Ah, the oldest trick in the book, if you don't play by my rules, you don't get to play at all. Talk about a bedroom Cold War. You're not the a-hole here, OP, but amidst all the upheaval, it's your son's tearful voicemail that cuts the deepest, isn't it? I mean, none of this is fair to your child. Amidst the chaos and hurt, there's an opportunity for clarity. It's a chance to remember that above all else, you're a father, a guiding light in your son's world of confusion. So, as you navigate the stormy seas of marital discord, remember to anchor yourself in love and compassion for the sake of the little ones who depend on you. After all, in the tumult of adult relationships, it's often the smallest voices that speak the loudest truths. Update post. 5 days later, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for the overwhelming support I have received. I've received a ton of messages, but please be patient with me. This week has definitely been tough for me. This whole family drama has definitely taken a toll on me physically and mentally. I just want to add a few crucial details that I missed mentioning in my original post. I suffer from a genetic heart condition that puts me at risk of stress-induced cardiac arrest. I used to work full-time but was forced to cut down on my work after suffering a silent heart attack. This was nearly a decade ago, but since then, I've worked on my own physical and mental well-being. Some people didn't understand me constantly mentioning why it was such an issue working the extra 20%. I honestly don't know how much time I have left, and my kids are the most important things in my life. For my own mental health, it's essential that I get to spend time with the kids throughout the week. Besides my wife and kids, I have nothing. I hate my effing job and purely continue for the sake of my kids and wife. Well, after spending a day at my parents' house, eventually, I felt enough time had passed for me to gather my thoughts on everything. What she did seemed like the ultimate slap in the face, but I went back with the intention to resolve this and didn't want to escalate this effing nightmare. My wife seemed happy I returned, wasn't apologetic at all. The kids, especially my son, were ecstatic. That sort of made me ignore the lack of remorse for the time being. That same night, after putting my kids to bed, I told her we needed to have a serious discussion. I told her how I felt about everything she did, the fact that she knows about my health condition and still went through with it, the fact that I set clear boundaries and she still chose to quit her job without my consent. How the fact that she told my son that I was going to abandon the family really felt like a stab in the back. How throughout all of this she didn't even seem remorseful once. The fact that she chose her own happiness to the detriment of mine. The fact that I sacrificed so much for the family and got repaid like this. The fact that we now, as a family, have to make major lifestyle changes since a third of our family income vanished. For a split second, I saw an ounce of sadness in her eyes before she went right back to being annoyed with me. I then simply told her to lay out her half of the story. Here's a summary of what she said. She felt ignored by me constantly rejecting her proposal. She had worked long enough, and this was finally the time for her to enjoy her life as a true wife. She also said that I was being a baby about the whole spending extra time with the kids thing. That really pissed me off, and we ended up getting into a heated argument. I couldn't bear any of it anymore and just ended up sleeping in the guest room. Until yesterday, nothing changed. She constantly tried to play everything off and wanted to embrace her new role by constantly trying to have sex with me and by making me my favorite dishes. It just felt like she was just trying to manipulate me again. I wasn't happy with any of it. I just kept on sleeping in the guest room. Well, my birthday was yesterday, and after work, my wife and kids picked me up, and we ate dinner together. This was probably the first time I genuinely had a smile on my face in a week. Well, that smile vanished because she tried to seduce me again later that night. I rejected her, and to my surprise, she had a full-on mental breakdown. I just held her as she started apologizing for what she did. She claimed she didn't understand how much she hurt me. She was sorry for making me feel like an afterthought, etc. We ended up sleeping in the same bed yesterday. I felt like things were finally moving in the right direction, and I again asked her about searching for a new job today. Instead of getting mad, she just replied with, "I need to think about it." Yeah, that's where things are as of today. It feels like progress is being made, but I don't know, this just might be another manipulation tactic of hers. I'll probably make a final update in a month or so. Reddit isn't doing my mental health any favors. How would you guys move forward in this situation? Could I have done something better? Is she being genuine? And to those incels who constantly bring up Islam as a way to justify her behavior, please shut the F up. Now let's get some relevant comments from the community. The first commenter says, "If you're still questioning things at this point, respectfully, take your effing head out of your butt." OP replies, "I guess you're hinting at divorce. Let me make it more clear for you. In our culture, divorce is the last resort and extremely frowned upon, especially if there are kids involved. I want to fix this. If she shows no improvement after I've tried everything, yes, then I'll go for divorce." Someone else chimes in with, "She's not even being a good trad wife since they are supposedly meant to put their husband's needs ahead of their own, but she is definitely putting her wants ahead of your needs. It sounds like you really need couples counseling." OP replies, "She believes my needs solely revolve around sex. That's the problem." OP in a different comment says, "She has always been like this. She F's up or wants something from me, equal trying to F me 24/7s. Another person from the community says, "When she came to you with her issue, what did you do to help find a solution?" OP replied, "I constantly told her she can reduce her hours if she wants. That's fine with me. Being at home 24/7s without my consent is where I draw the line." Someone else asks, "Do you have life insurance?" OP says, "Yeah, I have insurance." On the subject of couples counseling, OP replies, "Thank you. Couples therapy can definitely help, but let's talk about your wife's sudden epiphany, shall we? Quitting her job without consulting you? then trying to play the role of the dutiful wife while simultaneously re-seducing you like it's her part-time job? Not sure that's how that works. And now she's having a full-on breakdown, apologizing for her shenanigans like she's auditioning for an Oscar. Is she genuine, or is this just another act? Well, I think you already know that answer, OP. It sounds like it could all be an elaborate ruse, a masterful manipulation designed to pull you back into her web of deceit. It seems like she just thinks she can do whatever she wants while you work your butt off to provide for the family. I mean, all of this definitely isn't something you want to be dealing with when you have a heart condition. And let's think about it this way. If you wanted to quit your job, she'd have the same reaction that you'd be having right now. What gives her the right to stay at home and not work when you're the one with the heart condition? Alcoholism post April 19, 2024, the next day. Editor's note. I did not originally include this post for my first brew because I was not sure if the sub was taken from allowed cross-posting. Several people linked it in the comments of that brew, so after reviewing the rules several times, I've included it on this post. I will take it down if that is against the rules anywhere. Title: I'm going through some family issues and have noticed myself reaching for the bottle far too often. Life has been terrible this past week. A lot of family drama, and work has been more stressful than ever. I just noticed myself reaching for whiskey more often than I usually do. I guess I'm just trying to drown out the misery for the time being. I'm scared I might turn to alcohol more often in the future. As of right now, I'm drinking about 2 glasses of whiskey a day when I get back from work. It used to be 1 glass a week. My gut is telling me to stop, but I feel like a zombie just going through life. I don't have any energy or self-control left. I also have 2 young kids and definitely don't want to set a bad example for them. Is this normal? Should I remove all alcohol from the house immediately, or am I overreacting? What would you guys' first steps be? Case the community has some thoughts. Hi mate, it's hard for me to say if you have a drinking problem or not. I think deep down, only you can know if something feels wrong or unhealthy about what you're doing. What I will say is that in my experience, alcohol is a really addictive and sinister substance that can easily take hold of your life. If you ever feel it's getting out of control, and/or that you want to quit drinking, then remember that there are a lot of people out there for you, primarily from your doctor and also from support groups such as AA. Wishing you all the best, mate. Feel free to message me for a chat if you like. George replies, thank you so much, George. I think I will start to cut down over the coming days. I don't want to take that risk of falling into complete addiction. Wishing you all the best as well, and hey, likewise, if you want to talk, I'm a few clicks away. New update 10 days later, April 16th from the OG. Again, I'm beyond grateful for all the love and support you guys have shown me. If I'm being honest with everyone, I've been drinking a lot to get through this mess. I felt like a zombie just wandering around with no purpose. My wife's actions completely broke me. Thankfully, I've managed to cut most of it out over the past week, and that's mostly thanks to Reddit. You guys seriously helped me keep my mind busy with something else besides alcohol. Being reminded that I have 2 smaller versions of myself looking up to me and learning from the things I do really helped me snap out of it. I've been at my lowest since making my first post, and I think I've just hit a new low. Until last week, nothing changed since my last post. My wife still pranced around enjoying her new lifestyle while I suffered in silence. After posting my update, I did realize that my wife 100% was trying to manipulate me into submitting to her demands. I asked her if she actually started looking for a job, and she hesitated and told me no, and she needs more time. If I'm being honest, that's all I needed to know from her. I tried making this work, but honest to God, I couldn't keep living like that. Every day that passed felt like a part of my soul vanished. My wife kept on trying to please me, but it didn't seem genuine at all. I've also started noticing her getting lazy and starting to neglect my kids. My wife stopped cooking, and after working 9 hours of hell, I was now the one to help my son with his homework and the one to play Barbie with my daughter. I'm not complaining about spending time with my kids, but I could seriously see this becoming worse as time goes on. I don't know where the woman I once fell in love with went, but that thing that lives with me wasn't her. I know a lot of you are going to smile hearing this, but I did tell my wife that I want a divorce last week. I came home from work and saw my wife sitting on the couch watching TV while my daughter was crying in her room. I just snapped at that moment. I told her we needed to have a serious discussion after the kids went to sleep. After I put my kids to sleep, I sat down with her and told her our marriage was over and that I'd be contacting my lawyer tomorrow. Divorce was never something I ever planned on doing in my life, but I just felt like something needed to change, or my kids would be visiting my gravesite in a few years. Our culture frowns upon it, and I knew I was about to get serious backlash for it, but at this point, I couldn't care less. I don't know why, but she thought I was joking and started laughing. I told her I was being serious this time, and her manipulation methods weren't going to work on me anymore, and her face just went pale. She then went from screaming at me to crying, to then blaming me for every issue in the family, and then to begging me for another chance. She literally went to get her laptop and tried to apply for jobs on Indeed while begging. I just told her to cut the BS and told her I tried my best, but she just kept giving me empty promises. I told her the following: I know her trying to F me was just a manipulation tactic, and not to show her devotion to me, as she puts it. If she was truly sorry, why didn't she start applying for jobs immediately instead of waiting until I confronted her? Her completely disregarding any of my feelings and needs while purely pursuing her own shows me how selfish she actually is. She knows about my health and still chose to completely F me over, and now, this part pissed me off a lot. Her poisoning my son against me when this all started was beyond effed up, and looking back, was enough of a reason to divorce her. We ended up fighting for another hour or so, and her constant screaming ended up waking up our daughter. That's when I told my wife to shut the F up and go to bed. The following day, my mom called me during work and asked if I lost my mind or something. My wife told my mom that I was going to divorce her. She claimed that I was bringing serious shame onto the family, and that she didn't raise me to abandon my kids. Yep, my wife told my mom that I was planning on abandoning my kids, and has been feeding my kids the same BS. I explained to my mom the reasons why I want a divorce, but she won't budge. If I divorce my wife, I'm a disgrace of a man, and my mom wants nothing to do with me. I know my mom well enough to tell that her words are just empty threats, but what hurts me most are the reactions of my kids. My son won't look me in the eyes and won't even let me anywhere near his room. My daughter just tries to hit me whenever I try to talk to her. I've tried explaining to them that I'm, in fact, not going to give up on them and that me and their mom are just going to separate, but they just seem to believe whatever BS my wife tells them. Friends and in-laws also claim that I'm a monster for making my wife go through this. My wife was served with the divorce papers 2 days ago and has been crying non-stop since. Oh, I have told my kids about the divorce papers and they both claim that they will never talk to me again, and in my son's words, I'm a bad husband and father. I cried myself to sleep that night. I thought divorce would bring me peace, but it's only brought me one step closer to taking my life. As I stated in my previous post, I have nothing, and I am nothing without my kids. Growing up dead poor as a refugee in Germany, I promised myself that I would give my kids a life that I myself could have only dreamed of. But I feel like I failed. I'm sorry for making this post longer than it has to be. Again, I just want to thank everyone for the love and support, but this will probably be my last post. Wishing you all a lovely week. Let's see what the community does to help this person out. The first person says, I'd be showing anyone and everyone your posts, and also look into the custody laws for wherever you live. Also, you have to keep trying to get through to your kids and convince them you're not going anywhere. You are 100% not the a-hole in this situation. OP replies, thank you for the advice, but I feel like that's going to do more harm than good. I feel like they're just going to be mad that I'm sharing my private life with strangers on the internet. On top of that, their English isn't good enough to understand my story anyway. And yes, I've been looking into the ins and outs of custody laws here. Someone else chimes in, the best way to get your kids to understand that you are not abandoning them is to go for full custody. You can tell the judge that your wife has no income and no desire to work, and as such, she cannot afford to give your children any kind of stability or decent life. When the children see you're fighting for them, they'll realize that you are not abandoning them, only their mother who wants to coast through life on your dime. OP replies, thank you, but I seriously fear that I won't get any custody due to me working near full-time. Another commenter replies, you're an idiot. Take your kids and get out. Stop leaving them with her. OP replies, do you want me to take them with me to the office? They currently don't want anything to do with me. I took a week off work to maybe go on a trip with my kids to help them relax during this mess, but they just refuse to leave my wife's side and claim I'm a monster. Another community member says, you working full-time is what will get you custody. You can afford to house, feed, and clothe your kids. Start the paper trail. Communicate with your soon-to-be ex-wife only by text. Use Reddit search for FU binder, make one religiously, and back it up. Have a plan for after-school care for the kids. That's the last part that will show you're 100% ready for full custody. Don't give up. Your kids need you. You need you alive. Big hugs, and keep updating us, please. OP replies, depends. The government could argue that me just paying my wife alimony and child support and me maybe getting week visitation would be a better option. Nothing is definitive. I'm still researching what the most likely outcome would be and preparing my finances accordingly. In response to several longer encouraging comments telling Op to seek help and that they're worried about him, Opia replies, "Thank you. It's hard battling these thoughts, but I know that I'm only going to hurt my family doing it." OP also clarifies one point. "I know a lot of people assume this, but we used to split chores. If I was home, I did most of the cooking, cleaning, etc., and on weekends my wife cooked and I did the chores." On the note of parental alienation, thank you for bringing that up to my attention. I'll have to look into that where I live. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist here, but I'll be researching it regardless. The idea of a post-nup so you can keep your money is brought up. Thank you for the advice, but I'm not worried about giving her half of my assets. When we both got together, we were both flat broke. She helped me achieve the things I've achieved so far in my career. That's why I married her in the first place, because I thought she would be with me through thick and thin. But yeah, people change. As far as alimony is concerned, I'm not sure. It might be around $2,000 to $3,000 a month for both kids if she gets primary custody of them. OP does clarify alimony versus child support. I'm sorry. English isn't my first language. Yeah, I meant to say child support. As far as alimony is concerned, I don't really care. I just want this nightmare to end. Do you live in Germany? No, I live in Switzerland. Yeah, but courts here still rule in favor of the woman. Looks like you've been through the ringer lately, huh? First off, let me just say I hear you. Dealing with family drama and work stress can feel like being trapped in a never-ending nightmare, and turning to whiskey for solace? Well, let's just say I've heard that tune before. But here's the thing, buddy. You're not alone in this. We've all had these moments where we feel like life's a punching bag, taking hit after hit until we're down for the count. But you've got something a lot of folks don't: resilience. You took a hard look at your situation and made some tough calls. Divorce? Yeah, that's no picnic, but sometimes it's the only way to reclaim your sanity. And hey, kudos for standing your ground, even when the whole world seems to be against you. And as for your kids, I can't even begin to imagine how tough it must be feeling right now, especially with them pulling away. It's like getting sucker punched in the gut after already being down for the count. Your kids are hurting, confused, and probably feeling like they've been tossed into the middle of a hurricane. It's not about you being a bad father, it's about them trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. Right now, what they need most is consistency and reassurance. Keep showing up for them, even when they push you away. Be patient, be present, and let them know you're not going anywhere, no matter what. It might not happen overnight, but with time and love, those walls they've built around themselves will start to crumble. Keep communicating, keep listening, and above all, keep being the dad they need, even if they don't realize it yet. What do you think? What would you do in this situation? What would you have done differently? Thank you for joining us today.
Story 3.
I'm telling this, fully aware that many will dislike me for my actions and the consequences of my betrayal. Reading my own words is disgusting because I know what I did is unforgivable. I understand too well how needlessly tragic the events were. My hope is simply that my story can be shared with anyone in a relationship, and maybe it prevents future betrayals. Specifically, I hope someone cheating or thinking about it might read this and pause. Many might think my example of what can go wrong being unfaithful is a rare occurrence. People more knowledgeable than I am have told me my situation is sadly not unique. But I'm willing to take the hate I'll receive by sharing this if it prevents even one person from breaking a loved one's heart. I'm a 28-year-old woman, married to a wonderful man I'll call William. 8 months ago, he confronted me with proof I'd been emotionally and physically unfaithful. A few days later, he committed self-destruction. Typing those words out has caused people I don't even know to hate me. I couldn't believe I had the capacity to do something so evil, hurting someone I'd loved since childhood. But I did it. If you'd asked either me or William if either of us would ever be unfaithful, we both would have laughed. But to my shock, I allowed myself to lose focus and strayed. I knew it would destroy him if he ever found out. But I took the heart of the man I loved and crushed it so cruelly. He couldn't endure the pain of this life anymore. To those thinking I don't deserve to be breathing, I agree. I've attempted self-destruction twice. I'm convinced there's a reason I'm still here. For now, I've convinced myself that the longer I live, the more I suffer, and I don't deserve the mercy of self-destruction. Honestly, William and I grew up together. I can remember my early youth, and I always knew William. We were in the same Sunday school and public school classes. Our families were friends long before we came along. He always made me laugh. Kids can be mean, but William never was. I realized I thought he was cute in 6th grade, and it became an official crush in high school. William and I were each other's only loves from early high school through college. We were best friends and cherished each other. After graduation, we took a year to get stable jobs near our families and decided to get married. We took vacations together and were ravenous for each other. The only time closeness was off the table was during that time of the month. But we'd make love for hours, beautiful moments of passion. And I threw it all away for something tawdry, cheap, and worthless. We were planning to have children, knew their names, and were both pure. He was my first everything, and I was his. Part of me wishes I could say I had a drunken one-night stand, but no. I got involved with a man inferior to my husband. I didn't even consider the possibility that a friendship with another man could lead to an attachment forming. My husband and I had a strong marriage. As foolish as it sounds now, we really did. My husband was the epitome of strength, and I was the weak one. Before this, I considered myself a strong woman. It's just that no one ever told me that while our relationship was strong, no relationship is bulletproof. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wish someone had shot me before anything I did became secretive. It's an indisputable fact the world would be far better with my husband here instead of me. I had many chances to stop it before anything happened, and I had no reason to allow anything to happen. After a brief and heated conversation, he walked out, and I never spoke to him again. I tried to contact him in every way I could think of. I tried so many times just to let him know I'm truly sorry and that I hate what I did. My texts to him never showed anything but an unread status to me, so I doubt he read any emails or heard any voicemails. But everyone said I needed to give him space and time to think. 2 nights after William confronted me at 3:17 a.m., there was a loud knock at the front door. I turned on the lights, thinking it might be someone drunk wanting to curse me out, or worse. Then there was another loud knock, and I quickly put on a hoodie before going to the door. When I opened it and saw 2 policemen, I knew they could be there for many reasons, but I instantly understood why they were there. They told me my husband's body had been found due to an apparent self-destruction, and it devastated me. I dropped to my knees, wailing, tearing at my skin and hair as the police tried to calm me down. When the EMTs arrived, I was sitting on the steps, rocking back and forth, repeating apologies. I couldn't make it to the funeral, even if William's family had allowed my family to attend. I was kept sedated for days. The first thing I wanted to do when I got out was visit William's grave. But nobody knew where his parents had him buried, and that hurt deeply. That night, I attempted self-destruction for the first time. I've now been hospitalized twice for attempted self-destruction. I'm not asking for pity. In fact, I don't want it. Nothing can take away this heartache, and nothing can numb it. Part of me wishes I had somehow forced him to see me, just for a moment, to tell him how sorry I am and that I knew our marriage was over. But I didn't get that. No, I didn't deserve it. I have to face the fact that what I did was so vile that making my husband see me might have forced him to take his life even sooner. Many people have said my actions led him to take his life, and I don't doubt it. Until that horrible day, we were incredibly happy. No self-destruction note verified I caused his passing away. But we had been so happy, loving nearly every moment together. To go from that bliss to grief quickly ended him. I ended him. My words, actions, and thoughts betrayed us both. Regret doesn't damage you. If it did, I would have died before my husband ever confronted me. When COVID hit, William and I quarantined together. I taught at an exclusive private school, and our salary was assured as long as isolation was needed. William worked from home, making progress on a project. Despite the world's worries, we enjoyed our time together, getting closer. I am truly sorry for those who lost a loved one to the horrible disease. But my husband and I grew closer during those weeks. We joked about others struggling with family time, We simply couldn't get enough of each other. After the first month, we agreed to limit arguments to once a day for about a week. Our only argument during quarantine was about doing laundry, just to put clean sheets on the bed again. I cheated on that man, leading him to end his life due to my actions. I hate myself in many ways, but knowing I had it all is the most difficult pill to swallow. My affair with Paul, the lacrosse coach, started innocently during Zoom meetings. No attraction was present. When we met face-to-face, there was zero attraction, at least from me. But I didn't sense any lustful attention from him toward me. During that introduction, I learned he was engaged, and I told him I was happily married. No closeness tension, nothing hinting it would ever be a possibility. The school allowed half the staff and students to attend in person for a week, while the other half used Zoom. The next week they switched. This was to help with social distancing and the students' feelings of isolation. While eating lunch one day before my next class, I got an email from Paul asking me to edit toasts and jokes for his upcoming wedding. I was used to editing, so it was nothing. I felt important enough to tell William, and since it pertained to Paul's wedding, I saw no reason to bore my husband with details about that day. The email included a toast to Paul's parents and to the bride's parents. I took what he said and added a few phrases to tug at the heartstrings of all who attended. The jokes aimed at his brother, who was the best man, were really funny, but a bit too crude for my taste at a wedding. I mentioned this when I sent back his edited speeches. He laughed it off, saying I didn't understand his family's sense of humor, which included teasing. This email exchange marked several months of back-and-forth communication, but surprisingly, nothing inappropriate happened until the very end. Throughout our conversations, there was never any flirting or escalation. We did discuss taxes, but our talks were purely scientific and psychological, making even the biggest nymphomaniac in history drier than the Sahara. The discussions about race, politics, religion, science, and sports sometimes got heated. I was called prudish for my tax opinions, but I enjoyed the discussions, confident there was no temptation on either end. All of this occurred during work hours. My husband and I had a landline for emergencies, and once we were home, our smartphones were turned off. Paul didn't even have my number to text until I emailed him with a witty remark. Late in the day, he asked for my number to counter what I'd sent. Many coworkers had my email, so I didn't think much of it. I genuinely believe Paul had no interest in pursuing me, as he was smitten with his fiancée at the time. However, about a month before their wedding, Paul discovered his girlfriend had been having an affair with her high school boyfriend for over a year. He was shocked and deeply hurt. Unintentionally, I became the person he vented to. I'm not sure when our conversations crossed a line, but I started feeling genuinely sorry for Paul. I despised his fiancée for what she did, and I saw nothing wrong with that. After a particularly tough night for him, he looked frazzled at school, and I could tell he'd been crying. I gave him a hug, and he asked if we could talk after school. Since I had a few hours before William got home, I agreed. In hindsight, I realized what drew me into conversations with Paul was a different opinion. William and I had discussed almost every imaginable topic, and I usually knew his response. Most of the time, I craved surprise or verbal conflict. It was foolish, pathetic, and weak, but that led to the affair. Everything with William was perfect, and we spent every available moment together. I mentioned a coworker named Paul to William, but as nothing was happening, I didn't elaborate, and he saw no reason to pry. When William had to go out of town for 3 weeks, we FaceTimed daily, and I missed him intensely. With sudden spare time, I found myself texting Paul just to pass the time. Instead of occasional conversations, Paul and I often had dinner and drinks before going home. Oddly enough, what led to us becoming physical was me spraining my ankle and the school nurse being unavailable that week. I hurt my ankle and went to Paul, assuming he, as a coach, had numbing spray or an ace bandage. While he was tending to my ankle, I noticed he had an apparent hardness. I was surprised until I realized he could see slightly up my skirt from his position. For a moment, I found it stimulating that I was turning him on. I adjusted myself to see if a slightly better view would arouse him more. He called me out on it, and I laughed, telling him to work out his frustrations with his girlfriend. Suddenly, he kissed me, and I pushed him away. He kissed me again, and this time I didn't resist. We made out for a few minutes before I snapped out of it, hurriedly left his classroom, and sat in my own classroom in disbelief of what had just happened. I didn't intend for it to happen, and I'm sure Paul didn't either. Unsure whether to call William immediately or wait until he got home that night, I spoke to Paul after classes. He apologized, advised me not to bring conflict into my marriage, and suggested we stay friends. With William out of town and focused on work, I didn't want to add more stress. After discussing Tulsa with William that night, I decided to wait until he got home. His company faced issues, causing delays and extending William's stay by 2 weeks. Paul was there for me to discuss what had happened between us. I couldn't confide in my female friends or family, who all loved William. If I had known, maybe strangers on a site like this would have been the best option. Unfortunately, I vented to the last person I should have. One Friday after work, Paul and I went to a new restaurant for dinner. We sat at the bar, had a few drinks, and I explained my unease about telling my husband. Paul asked how I thought William would take the news, and I suggested he might want to call in sick. The next day, I told William. He asked if I thought he would fight Paul, and I said no. However, I knew it would mean the end of Paul and I talking. Paul confessed he might not have made it through his breakup without me. I assured him I was glad to help and didn't regret it. As the realization that our friendship would end sank in, we both felt a bit depressed. We drank too much, and I ended up at Paul's apartment doing more than kissing. As soon as it was over, guilt set in. Yes, it should have set in earlier, but I knew my marriage was over. William and I had both said society allows too many second chances for those who don't deserve them. While we believe cheaters deserve a second chance, it could never be with the betrayed spouse. Things got complicated when William returned from Tulsa. I was having my period, so I knew there would be no closeness between us. Thankfully, I wouldn't have subjected my husband to diseases, despite wanting to make love to William one last time. I couldn't allow that. I wrote a long letter, confessing what I'd done and planned to give it to William after a face-to-face confession. To this day, I don't know how William discovered what was going on. He may have been monitoring my online conversation with Paul from day one. I never got to ask him how he found out, and the realization that he learned about my betrayal before I could tell him caused me to fall to my knees, swearing I planned to confess. William didn't believe me, and I wouldn't have either. He had a stack of texts between Paul and me printed out, though I didn't deny any of the accusations. That honesty came far too late. He packed a few things and left me on a Monday evening. Wednesday night, he drove to a shopping center, parked his car, and took his own life. Knowing I had destroyed our relationship tortured my soul like never before. Realizing I robbed him of a chance to find someone else to be happy with broke me. The understanding that I didn't just end my relationship with William, but every relationship he had or would have filled me with more guilt than I could ever express. I could discuss everything that has occurred since William's passing, but many details might not interest most people. Simply put, his family and mine hold strong negative feelings towards me. My family remains disgusted by my actions, and their disappointment and shame persist. Their love for me endures, but the sense of disappointment and shame will never fade, and rightly so. The outcomes were not what I intended, but when choices lead to pain and suffering, we bear the guilt of causing that grief. I see a therapist twice a week to work through things. Through my therapist, I met someone genuinely helping me sort through my feelings. Years ago, she intentionally set a small fire as a joke, but it quickly spread, causing multiple endings of life. We've discussed various aspects of her story and mine. Things can't be the way they once were, nor should they. To keep living, I need a plan to make the remaining part of my life as meaningful as possible. So, that's essentially my story. If anyone wants to post hate messages and call me a wretched person, go right ahead. If it helps you release your rage, consider me your verbal punching bag. For those who have been cheated on, some of you may have been intentionally betrayed. But those who had a partner just as perplexed about the cheating as you were, Listen to my story. It doesn't justify anything I did. Quite the opposite. But if it helps you understand that you bear little responsibility for the infidelity, so be it. To unrepentant cheaters, I hope you listen to my cautionary tale and recognize your ability to destroy not just someone else, but also your relationships and a significant part of yourself. I know I can't preach or judge anyone but myself. I just hope no one finds their William and loses them or sinks to the depths I did. Most importantly, I want people in great relationships to cherish and never take them for granted. Humans aren't immune to being swayed under the wrong conditions. When we love someone, we carry part of their soul with us. One betrayal makes it impossible for that person to hold that piece of you again. I had my husband's heart in my hands, and now I deserve never to hold it again, nor will he ever hold mine. This life has too much pain without hurting the ones we love. Love is too precious to risk on anything. Update. I cheated, causing my husband to commit self-destruction days after confronting me. This is intended as a final response. William likely didn't read it, and considering he's been dead a year, I doubt it was him. For those trying to psychoanalyze me, I appreciate the effort, even if it was for your own self-interests. Professionals haven't provided a good theory for why I let things happen. I feel like there should be some valid reason why I did what I did too. I just can't come up with one, and it wouldn't be a valid reason if I found one. For those thinking this is fake, I can't fathom a reason to post this other than to warn and perhaps help. It wasn't a karma grab. I've barely responded, so it wasn't for attention, and it certainly wasn't to lift my spirits because I've rightfully been slammed for my betrayal. Admitting to something horrible is not easy. Imagining it never happened doesn't help me, but you all do. I do not keep in contact with Paul, and have not heard from him since before William committed self-destruction. The only things I know about him are secondhand from people I worked with. I have no interest in being with Paul or having him in my life in any way. So those thinking I planned my vile actions to ride off into the sunset with a first-year lacrosse coach? No, bless you all. May you have stellar lives full of happiness, but most of all, peace.
I was married to my wife for 4 years, and our marriage faced challenges due to her struggle with drinks. Even before we tied the knot, I knew she enjoyed drinking, particularly at parties. She was the kind of person who loved to indulge in drinks during social events. We first met at a club where she and her friends were celebrating a birthday. I was instantly attracted to her and approached her in the group. That night, we talked and spent the rest of the evening at the club. After meeting, we went home together because she asked if she could come with me. On that first night, we became faithful. Despite my wife thinking I was only interested in a one-night stand, I felt differently. I genuinely liked her, and our closeness deepened my feelings for her in the following weeks. We started dating after spending time together at least twice a week for 3 months. At the time, she had just finished college and was working hourly jobs until she could land her desired job. Early on, I knew she had a drinking issue, but I didn't expect it to escalate to the point of needing rehab after over a year of dating. We got married, officially moved in together, and unfortunately, a year later, she lost her parents and only sibling in a tragic accident. This intensified her emotional struggle, leading her to cope with the pain through excessive drinking. I thought her extreme drinking might be a temporary response to mourning, but it persisted. Months after the burial, she didn't recover from her family's loss, becoming a shadow of her former self. Despite my efforts to comfort her, she was in a dark mental state. Around the same time, she experienced a breakdown, adding to her emotional turmoil. She stopped working, and the responsibility of caring for both of us fell on me. On days when she wasn't drinking, she displayed aggression and anger over trivial matters. I walked in on my wife making out with a neighbor, and I was really angry. She was drunk, but he seemed sober. I kept the neighbor away and informed his wife, yet I couldn't take any action against my wife, thinking she wasn't in the right state of mind. I was wrong because a few days later, I caught her talking to the same neighbor. When she saw me, she immediately walked away. Meanwhile, her drinking problem worsened. If I gave her money, she'd spend it all on drinks, reaching a point where she couldn't go a day without drinking. I got frustrated and tired of putting up with her, handling bills alone and still caring for her. It became overwhelming, so I decided to get her help when there was no other option. I informed her I was taking her to rehab, and after several months of persuasion, she finally went. Seeing a significant improvement, I was relieved to be getting my wife back. As a concerned husband, I finally found peace as she broke free from her bad habits and started rebuilding her life. However, my relief didn't last. One day, while enjoying YouTube at home, my wife announced she was marrying the love of her life. I didn't take it seriously at first and just laughed it off. But when she mentioned her rehab coach, Ryan, I became attentive. According to her, Ryan was the one for her, and they were in love, planning to get married. She praised him for treating her well, talking nicely, and more. I was shocked and knew she was going crazy. The Ryan she talked about was already a married man with 2 kids, making no sense. I was sure she didn't come up with the marriage idea on her own, so I confronted Ryan on her next meeting day. When I shared everything my wife said, Ryan said she was delusional. Somehow, my wife had overheard his responses. She had been eavesdropping on her conversation. Upon hearing him, she left her hiding spot, tears streaming from her eyes. She sobbed like a baby and simultaneously showed me a video of her and Ryan, both with nothing on in bed and the bathroom. Ryan had recorded it during their last hotel encounter and sent it to her. She claimed Ryan vowed to divorce his wife so they could marry. When she presented the video, Ryan, angered, berated her, calling her foolish for thinking he'd leave his wife for an unstable woman. His words shattered her heart. I'd never seen my wife cry like that since losing her family. It became clear she truly loved Ryan, even planning to divorce me for him, which deeply saddened me. I was furious with Ryan for exploiting my wife, his client. To give him a taste of his own medicine, I pressed charges using the video as evidence in court. Sharing this is easy because the hurt and heartbreak almost shattered me. Despite the challenges my wife presented, I still loved her and tried to help her return to normal. Unfortunately, she cheated on me in return, planning to divorce me for her rehab coach. I felt pity for her when she discovered Ryan's deceit and nearly fell into depression. Out of compassion, I admitted her to a mental hospital, and after her admission, I initiated a divorce. Although it seemed she wasn't in her right state of mind, she was clear-headed enough to consider divorcing me. Honestly, our relationship was a significant waste of time, resources, and emotions, but I'll view it as a life lesson. Here's a piece of free advice. Some women aren't worth the sacrifices most men make. Even if you give them the universe, they might still find an excuse to cheat. Regarding Ryan, I won the court case, and he received a jail term for exploiting his mentally unstable client. The government also shut down his business. I often miss my wife, but I won't let her problems excuse breaking our marital vows and cheating on me.
Story 4.
2 years ago, after completing my master's in computer science with a focus on network security, I moved to New York City to start my career. Landing a job at Google right out of school seemed like the perfect opportunity. However, the biggest challenge was finding a place to live. I assumed I could afford an apartment in Manhattan, but quickly realized that renting on my own was almost impossible unless I wanted multiple roommates. After some advice from coworkers, I shifted my search to Brooklyn, where things finally started to come together. One evening, my companion and I headed to a new restaurant on Church Street with good reviews. We passed a gay club as the door opened, revealing a performer dressed as Madonna on stage. She looked at me, confused. Why would they want to do that? My thoughts wandered back to memories of Mickey and Beth. 24 months ago, Brooklyn. I hate the bar scene, I said, frustrated after another failed attempt at meeting someone. Mickey just laughed, but I was serious. Earlier that night at a Soho bar, a drunk girl spilled 2 beers all over me. She mumbled an apology and the bartender gave me a towel, but the damage was done. I headed home, embarrassed to ride the subway soaked in beer. People stared, probably thinking I was homeless. When I reached my stop, I hurried back to my apartment. Mickey opened the door, grinning. Looks like you had a party. I wasn't amused, but I knew better than to snap at my 6'5" drag queen roommate. I had moved to New York 18 months ago after getting my master's in computer science. Google had offered me a dream job with great pay and a relocation from Nashville. But finding an apartment in Manhattan was harder than I expected, unless I wanted to live with 5 roommates in a tiny space. After some advice from coworkers, I started looking in Brooklyn. That's how I ended up walking down a charming Brooklyn street looking for an apartment. I found the address next to a small restaurant and climbed the stairs to meet the tenants, Mickey and Beth. Beth, a slim woman in a leotard, opened the door. After a brief introduction, she led me inside to meet Mickey, a towering man who, despite his intimidating height, was polite and showed me around the surprisingly nice apartment. They offered me the biggest room, but at 60% of the rent. Still, it was affordable, so I considered it. But before I could say yes, they started asking about my job and lifestyle, like I was applying for a club membership. Then Mickey asked, "Are you gay?" "I'm not gay," I said, "but I hope you won't hold that against me." Mickey laughed. "I guess you can be our token straight tenant." After that, we relaxed, and I moved in. Beth was a dancer by passion, though she worked as a waitress to pay the bills. Mickey, on the other hand, performed as a female impersonator on weekends and worked at Starbucks during the day. Despite the initial awkwardness, we made a good household. I quickly realized that despite the intense questioning during my apartment visit, Mickey and Beth were eager to find a roommate, especially one willing to cover most of the rent. We soon settled into a comfortable routine. Seeing Mickey in makeup became normal, and I politely ignored Beth's occasional overnight guests. To them, I was a mix between a novelty and a curiosity. They'd only had female roommates before, so a straight Southern guy like me was something new. My accent became a source of constant amusement, but overall, it was a learning experience for all of us. Working at Google was another challenge. Surrounded by brilliant minds, I initially felt out of place. It took time to adjust and contribute, but after 6 months, I started to find my footing. The job required frequent trips to California, which became exhausting over time, especially when I had to be back in the office the next morning after long flights. As a result, my personal life took a hit, or would have if I'd had much of one. I hadn't dated much since losing my parents in a tragic accident just before my college graduation. The grief consumed me for a while, delaying my plans for graduate school and forcing me to handle their affairs. By the time I enrolled at MIT a year later, I had left Nashville behind, both physically and emotionally. At MIT, I focused on my studies, barely socializing. With a skewed male-to-female ratio, dating opportunities were slim. By the time I graduated and moved to New York, I hoped to meet new people. But the dating scene wasn't what I expected. Many women I met were older and looking for a serious commitment, while others, closer to my age, seemed more interested in partying and alcohol. The final straw came when a drunken woman at a Soho bar spilled beer all over me. Frustrated, I vented to Mickey, who listened patiently. "You're going about this all wrong," he said. "Meeting women in bars won't work if the only thing you have in common is alcohol." He suggested I try a dating website called Eye Contact. I was skeptical, but Mickey convinced me to give it a shot. The site was expensive, which Mickey explained was intentional to weed out casual daters. Hesitant but curious, I signed up and filled out a lengthy questionnaire about myself, rather than focusing on what I wanted in a partner. As I finished, Beth peeked over my shoulder, offering her usual sarcastic commentary. But, despite her opinions, I was ready to see where this new approach might lead. The next step was uploading a photo. I didn't have any, but Beth quickly grabbed her digital camera, adjusted the lighting, and snapped a few shots. When I asked how I looked, she quipped, "Almost human." Still, she uploaded one to my profile, and it looked pretty decent. After saving my profile, I asked Mickey, "Now what?" He smiled. "Just wait. This gets good." Moments later, profiles of 3 women appeared on the screen, each attractive and interesting. I rated them based on appearance, interests, and overall appeal, while Mickey and Beth whispered and laughed behind me. Curious, I asked, "How do I contact them?" Mickey grinned. "You don't. They're just models." Before I could get frustrated, a message appeared. Within 24 hours, Eye Contact would provide real matches based on my preferences, complete with contact info. "That's it?" I asked. Mickey assured me, "Trust me, by tomorrow you'll be impressed." The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I had to wait until after work to log in. When I got home, both Mickey and Beth hovered over my shoulder as I checked the site. 3 profiles popped up. The first was a cute redhead working as a copywriter. She seemed fun. The second, a tall brunette from an art gallery, made me think of museum dates and cozy dinners. Both were appealing. But the third, she was stunning. With dark hair, striking eyes, and high cheekbones. An investment banker, a little older than me. But our interests matched perfectly. Beth, looking over my shoulder, remarked that she would date the woman herself. As I was about to click on the contact info, Mickey stopped me and asked if I was sure she was the right choice, suggesting she might be out of my league. Annoyed, I reminded him that he had convinced me to try the service and insisted that if Eye Contact thought we were a match, I was going for it. Mickey backed off, raising his hands and advising me not to get burned. I clicked on the contact info and saw her name, Susan Devereaux, along with her phone number and email. I was about to email her when Beth stopped me, asking if I really planned to do that. I admitted I thought it was a low-pressure way to introduce myself, but Beth scoffed, saying an email wouldn't impress her. Instead, she suggested I call. Beth advised me to ask if Susan would be in town the following Monday, rather than a weekend, since she might already have plans. She also suggested meeting for a drink near Susan's office, as it would make her feel more comfortable and give her an easy way to leave if things didn't go well. The logic made sense, so I agreed. I grabbed my phone, saved Susan's contact info, and made the call. To my surprise, she answered. Following Beth's advice, I asked if she'd like to meet for a drink on Monday. She agreed, suggesting a place near her office. After setting the time for 7 o'clock, I ended the call feeling both amazed and relieved. The entire weekend I kept thinking about the meeting, debating what to wear and rehearsing conversations. I felt like a nervous teenager on his first date. Mickey, sensing my nerves, told me to relax and be myself, advice I knew I needed to follow. Monday arrived, and after work, I arrived at the restaurant right on time. She wasn't there yet, and as I ordered a drink, I started preparing myself for a possible no-show. But just as my drink arrived, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Susan, looking even more stunning in person. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, it was 8:30. I suggested dinner, and she eagerly agreed. We continued chatting over a light meal, and I found her to be everything I had hoped for: engaging, funny, and genuinely interesting. Thankfully, she seemed to enjoy my company too, and the evening turned out better than I had imagined. I checked my phone and realized it was past 11 o'clock. Apologizing for keeping Susan out so late, I offered to get her a cab. As I opened the door for her, she paused and told me, "You're different from most men I meet." Curious, I asked, "Good different or bad different?" She smiled and replied, "Good different. Most guys would have tried something by now." I decided to ask if she'd like to go out again. She said, "Definitely. Call me next week," and kissed me on the cheek before getting into the cab. I made my way home, floating on air, thrilled with how the evening had gone. Showing restraint, I waited until Monday to call her. When she answered, I asked if she was still interested in meeting up. She agreed, but sounded a bit less enthusiastic than before. I asked what day worked for her, and she suggested Friday. Then, without thinking, I asked if there was anything specific she'd like to do. Instantly, I regretted it, feeling like I was out of ideas already. She simply said, "Surprise me." After hanging up, I told Mickey how I felt I'd already messed things up, especially with the surprise request. We brainstormed ideas, but nothing seemed special enough. Finally, a bold plan came to mind, and I asked Mickey for help. He grinned and agreed, promising it would be unforgettable, even if it didn't go as planned. On Thursday, I called Susan to confirm the date, keeping the destination a secret. The next evening, I met her outside her office, and we took a cab to Grand Central Station. Once there, we sat on the mezzanine, overlooking the busy concourse. After a few minutes, Susan asked what we were doing. I smiled and said, "People watching." Just then, I pointed out a tall man in a fedora and trench coat below us. As he stopped, he set down a backpack, opened it, and music began to play. To Susan's surprise, the man threw off his coat, revealing a silver dress and heels, Mickey in full drag. As Lady Gaga's Born This Way blared, Mickey started dancing, joined by a group of performers who shed their coats to reveal matching outfits. The entire station stopped to watch, laughing and clapping. I glanced at Susan, and to my relief, she was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes, clapping along with the performance. It was clear the surprise had worked perfectly. As the song ended, the dancers blended back into the crowd, leaving Mickey alone. He climbed the stairs toward us, singing the final lines of Born This Way. When he reached us, he plopped into my lap and gave me a big kiss on the cheek. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Mickey stood, bowed, and then I introduced him to Susan. She told him the performance was amazing and admitted she'd never seen a flash mob in person. Afterward, we went to Mickey's club for food and drinks, and Susan had a great time. She enjoyed the performances and thought Mickey and his friends were wonderful. When we left, she pulled me into a cab, and after complimenting me on the surprise, kissed me passionately. We arrived at her place, and she hurried me inside. We spent the night together, full of passion, and I woke up the next morning to a repeat of the excitement. We showered together, and I finally had a chance to admire her in the daylight. She was fit and toned, and I was relieved that her body was natural and perfectly suited to her frame. Afterward, we joined her roommates for brunch. I was a bit embarrassed, knowing they likely heard everything from the night before, but they seemed unfazed. Susan introduced me to Missy and Brianna, her close friends from Vassar. Once brunch was over, I headed home, but Susan kissed me goodbye and asked me to call her, adding, "Surprise me again." Thus began our romance. We spent more and more time together, with work trips being the only real interruptions. I continually found new ways to surprise Susan, and she loved it. We visited Fort Tryon Park to see the cloisters, took a Circle Line cruise around Manhattan, and attended an avant-garde dance performance thanks to Beth's help. Susan enjoyed all these experiences, and I enjoyed making her happy. Over time, I spent more time at her apartment, where her roommates became used to me. I took her to my place in Brooklyn too, but she didn't seem as comfortable there. I also noticed that Susan and Beth didn't really connect, though they weren't hostile toward each other. It seemed like there was an unspoken tension between them, perhaps because of their differences. One Friday, we rented a car and drove to the Hamptons to spend the weekend with Susan's parents. As we arrived at their large mansion, my nerves increased, knowing they were quite wealthy. After Susan called out to them, her parents warmly greeted her, and I shook hands with Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux. Mrs. Devereaux, or Elaine, was elegant, though slightly altered by cosmetic surgery. Walter Devereaux was stocky, with white hair and a firm handshake. After a brief chat, we were shown to our rooms for the night. Susan went to her childhood room, while I was given a guest room. Later, Susan snuck into my room, dressed in a cute but sexy nightgown. Despite my concerns about her parents, she assured me she did what she wanted, and we spent the night together. The next morning, I hurried to join everyone for breakfast in the solarium. Mr. Devereaux mentioned plans for the day, a poolside lunch, a drive around town, and dinner at the club. I had hoped for more time alone with Susan, but it seemed the weekend would be busy with her parents. After breakfast, we toured the house and grounds. The sheer size of the mansion left me amazed. Later, we changed for the pool. While Susan and Elaine lounged in the sun, Walter and I relaxed under the cabana with screwdrivers. He spent much of the time discussing politics, and though I didn't agree with his extreme views, I kept my thoughts to myself. As the day wore on, the sun and drinks made me drowsy, and we all took naps in the afternoon. When I woke up, Walter drove us around the area, pointing out changes to Susan since she'd moved to Manhattan. I marveled at the massive estates along the Atlantic, a clear sign of the wealth in the area. By the time we returned to Susan's parents' house, it was nearly time for dinner. Although the dress code was casual, I suspected their version was different from mine. So I put on slacks, a knit shirt, and a sports coat. I felt fine until I saw Elaine and Susan in cocktail dresses fit for a red carpet. I was ready to panic, but Walter soon appeared in even more casual attire, not even wearing socks. At the club, I noticed the women dressed to impress, while the men kept it casual, though in expensive brands. Dinner was excellent, but conversation dragged, mostly gossip from Elaine and Walter pointing out wealthy men at other tables. I barely paid attention, relieved only when Susan gave me a quick wink. After dinner, Walter invited me to the library for a brandy and asked about my background. He assumed my father was involved in music law, but I proudly corrected him, explaining my dad's work in constitutional law, even mentioning his cases before the Supreme Court. The conversation fizzled after that. The next day, I was relieved when Susan and I finally left for Manhattan. On the drive back, she teased me about looking like I'd been to the dentist. I told her the weekend felt like a constant interrogation and asked if her parents were always like that. She laughed and reassured me, explaining they were just protective since she was their only child. She shared stories of her rebellious youth, recounting how she had always done what she wanted despite their plans for her. Things changed for her in high school after a friend's tragedy made her realize the importance of self-reliance, motivating her to take school seriously and eventually attend Vassar. When I expressed concern about the impression I made on her parents, Susan dismissed it, saying they didn't think anyone was good enough for her. She even joked that her dad suggested a prenuptial agreement. This threw me off, making me wonder if Susan was hinting at marriage, though we hadn't discussed it yet. We held hands the rest of the way back to the city, my mind racing with thoughts about our future. Once back in New York, our busy travel schedules kept us apart, but whenever we reunited, our time together was marked by passionate intensity, as if we couldn't get enough of each other. I wasn't inexperienced in the bedroom, but I quickly realized Susan was on a whole different level. She knew how to take things to another level and taught me to do the same. I was curious about her past, but I knew I couldn't expect her to be a pure, especially in New York. Whatever her experiences were, I was benefiting now. While Susan was away on a business trip, I decided to propose. Being bold had worked before, so I figured it was worth trying again. I retrieved my grandmother's engagement ring from my safe deposit box, hoping Susan would appreciate its sentimental value. When Susan returned from Boston late Tuesday, she was exhausted, so we made plans for Wednesday night. I kept the surprise quiet, and after dinner and dancing, I took her to the Empire State Building. We rode to the 102nd floor, where I led her to the edge. Just as she turned to ask why we were there, I dropped to one knee and presented the ring. "Susan Devereaux, will you marry me?" I asked. Shocked at first, she quickly said yes, to the cheers of nearby tourists. After slipping the ring on her finger, we headed to her apartment, where she excitedly shared the news with her roommates, Missy and Brianna. That night, Susan said it was the best surprise ever. The next morning, she shocked me again by suggesting we skip a big wedding and get married immediately at City Hall. Despite my concerns about her parents, she was adamant. She wanted to do it right away. The next day, we arrived at the Manhattan Marriage Bureau, but after completing the paperwork, we learned about the mandatory 24-hour waiting period. Susan was undeterred, planning to return the next day with Missy and Brianna as her bridesmaids. I was happy to go along with whatever made her happy, and called Mickey and Beth, who agreed to come as witnesses. On Friday afternoon, I waited in my best suit as Susan arrived in a stunning black dress with a large hat, flanked by her bridesmaids in matching off-white dresses. The ceremony was short and sweet, and after we kissed as husband and wife, Beth popped open a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We moved into the hallway to make way for the next couple, sharing champagne straight from the bottle. Mickey handed me the keys to the car he'd rented for us, and as we left, Susan tossed her bouquet to Beth. "I guess that's one tradition that won't come true," I joked as we drove off, beginning our new life together. As we headed toward the Holland Tunnel, Susan asked, "Where are we going?" I smiled and told her to be patient, saying it was another surprise. I'd already had her pack for a short honeymoon, but hadn't revealed the destination. We drove north on I-81, then west on I-90. It wasn't until we reached Buffalo that she figured it out, laughing, "We're going to Niagara Falls for our honeymoon." She loved the idea and couldn't wait to tell her friends. I had chosen the Lover's Rest Motel with its neon heart-shaped sign. When we entered our honeymoon suite, complete with a heart-shaped bed and in-room jacuzzi, Susan burst out laughing, especially when the bed rotated and vibrated. She declared it absolutely perfect before we settled into the fun. Despite it being a short weekend, we had a great time. We visited Niagara and Horseshoe Falls, even getting drenched on the Maid of the Mist. While the area around Niagara Falls was a bit tacky, we enjoyed exploring the scenic countryside near Lake Ontario. After our long drive back to Manhattan, we were exhausted but happy. We left our bags unpacked and collapsed into bed, eager for sleep after a weekend of honeymoon fun. As I held Susan close, I whispered, "Good night, Mrs. Morrison," and she murmured, "Thank you, baby." It was a wonderful surprise, before falling asleep. The next morning, Missy and Brianna had already left for work. I had taken an extra day off to move my things into the apartment. As I brought in my belongings, I asked Susan when her roommates planned to move out. She seemed surprised, saying she hadn't thought about it and didn't want to ask them to leave, as they'd lived together since college. I wasn't thrilled with her response, but decided to let it go. Living with two other women wasn't as glamorous as it might seem. They treated me like part of the furniture, casually going about their lives, sometimes even walking around in their underwear, but it was clear there was no intent behind it. Later, I overheard Susan on the phone with her parents, telling them about our quick wedding. Though they weren't happy, she confidently told me they'd get over it, as they always did. As time passed, Susan and I settled into our married life, which wasn't much different from before, aside from the official status. My job had improved, and I was now a team leader, though my West Coast travel kept me busy. I stayed in touch with Mickey and Beth, even helping a coworker move into my old apartment so they wouldn't be financially impacted by my departure. If there was any stress in our life, it was my constant effort to keep surprising Susan, as she thrived on spontaneity. Finding new, exciting experiences wasn't easy, especially with our demanding schedules. As we approached our one-year anniversary, I wanted to do something special, but struggled to come up with an idea. After a long red-eye flight delayed by storms, I arrived home completely exhausted and decided to take the day off. The apartment was empty, so I collapsed on the bed, my mind still racing for a surprise idea. Then I noticed Susan had left her laptop on, which was unusual for her. Out of curiosity, I moved the mouse and saw a Google News window. As I closed it, I accidentally discovered an open tab for eye contact, thanking her for renewing her membership. I was shocked. Why was she still using the dating site? I checked her recycle bin and downloads, but everything had been cleared. I knew Google's Chrome browser well enough to realize that hitting clear all doesn't truly delete downloads. So I opened the Windows Downloads folder and was shocked to find it filled with profiles from eye contact. Susan had downloaded dozens of them, about one every 2 weeks. As I reviewed the files, I found one with my own profile picture taken almost a year ago by Beth. To my horror, the most recent profile was from the day before, featuring a red-headed man from Boston. Susan was scheduled to fly to Boston the next day. I tried to stay calm, hoping there was an innocent explanation, but my instincts told me something was wrong. After copying all the profiles onto a flash drive and returning Susan's computer to its original state, I researched detective agencies. I found one, called them, and arranged a meeting. When I met with Miss Martin, a professional detective, I shared my story. She copied the files and Susan's profile from my flash drive. I asked her to investigate what Susan did in Boston the next night. Miss Martin assured me they would have a report ready by the following afternoon. Afterward, I called Susan and left a message, pretending to be stuck in Mountain View for a few more days. Then I reached out to Mickey and went over to talk things through with him and Beth. While Mickey hoped for the best, Beth was skeptical, and I feared she was right. I stayed at their place overnight. The next day I went to work as usual. Early in the afternoon, Miss Martin called to let me know the report was ready. I arrived at her office at 3 o'clock, filled with conflicting emotions. Part of me hoped for a misunderstanding, but I knew the truth was coming. Miss Martin handed me the report and said, "I regret to inform you that your suspicions were correct." The report included photos of Susan leaving her hotel and meeting a red-headed man, the same one from the eye contact profile. They had drinks, dinner, and danced together for hours. My heart sank as I realized what had been happening. The next photo was dark, but it clearly showed Susan and Red dancing, caught mid-kiss, with his hand on her rear. Miss Martin continued, "They took a cab back to the hotel and went to Susan's room. The next image showed them in the elevator, embracing, with Red's hand up Susan's skirt. The timestamp read 11:45 p.m. The next morning, Miss Martin said, he left the hotel around 7:30 a.m., and Mrs. Morrison checked out about an hour later. The final photo showed Susan, now in a business suit, getting into a cab. I asked, "So there's no actual proof of what happened in the room?" Miss Martin responded calmly, explaining that they had planted a motion-sensitive camera in Susan's room. She handed me a CD, but advised against watching it, warning that while I already knew the truth, the video would only create painful, unforgettable images. I hesitated, but agreed to think about it. Miss Martin asked if I was considering reconciliation. "No way," I said, explaining that not only had Susan betrayed me, but this was a planned affair. Plus, I knew there were many more profiles on her computer. Unfazed, Miss Martin asked if I had legal representation. I admitted I didn't. So she offered to refer me to an attorney in the same building. I didn't care if the agency got a commission. I just wanted to move forward. She arranged for me to meet the lawyer that day. That evening, I returned to Brooklyn with the folder and a business card for my new attorney. Beth was home, and I told her everything. When I mentioned the CD, she offered to preview it for me. After watching it, she came back with tears in her eyes and gently advised me not to watch it, saying it would only make things worse. I took her advice. With my decision made, I focused on the details of what I needed to do. Mickey and Beth were fully supportive, already talking as though they were taking charge of the situation. Their care and involvement touched me deeply. I returned to Susan's apartment on Friday afternoon, carrying my bags as though I had just arrived from the airport. When I walked in, I found the 3 Musketeers huddled on the couch, giggling and whispering. As soon as I entered, Susan jumped up, ran over, and leaped into my arms while Brianna and Missy snickered. Susan told me she had missed me a lot as she kissed me passionately. Then, with a sly look, she reminded me that the weekend was our anniversary and asked if I remembered. I calmly assured her that I hadn't forgotten and mentioned that I had a surprise for her, but she would have to wait until Sunday. Excited, Susan said she couldn't wait that long and asked for a hint about the plan. I firmly responded that she would just have to wait. The rest of the evening went as usual, except for Susan frequently whispering to Missy and Brianna. I figured they were either guessing about the surprise or comparing me to Red. I chose to ignore it. At bedtime, Susan initiated lovemaking, as she often did after one of our trips, but I refused, knowing what she'd been doing in Boston. I pushed her away, saying, "Not tonight, and not tomorrow night either. It's part of the surprise. You'll have to wait until Sunday." She seemed shocked and frustrated since she was always eager after my California trips. But the anticipation of the surprise kept her from pressing further, and she eventually fell into a restless sleep. Saturday was just as frustrating for her. Missy and Brianna took turns trying to get details from me whenever Susan wasn't around, offering their help with the surprise. I assured them everything was under control, hoping it was, and then teased them by saying they'd be part of the surprise too. This sent them into excited chatter, and they eagerly told Susan, who could hardly sit still in anticipation. That evening, I gave no further clues and suggested we order takeout instead of going out. Reluctant to leave me alone and risk missing any secret planning, they stayed in. By bedtime, Susan's frustration was palpable. She tried to tempt me again, but I held firm. "You don't want to ruin the surprise," I reminded her, and she begrudgingly gave up, rolling over to sleep. Sunday morning, I knew I had to give them something to avoid rebellion. Over breakfast, I told them we'd leave the apartment at 12:30 sharp, no special clothing or bags required, and we'd all leave together in a single cab. Their curiosity was in overdrive, and I left them guessing while I stepped outside to call Mickey. He reassured me everything was ready. Just be on time and enjoy the show, he said. At 12:30, I gathered the three of them and headed downstairs. The doorman found us a cab, and I slipped him a $50 tip. He looked surprised, but I liked him and knew I might never see him again. The girls piled into the back seat while I sat up front, allowing me to quietly tell the driver our destination, which the three misketeers couldn't hear. This caused an uproar of curiosity from the back, which I ignored with a smile. Despite the traffic, we arrived a bit early. As they got out of the cab, the girls seemed confused, staring up at the towering statue of Christopher Columbus. Brianna asked, "Why are we at Columbus Circle? Is this where the surprise happens?" Smiling, I led them to the base of the statue and had them sit on the steps. The area was buzzing with tourists and passers-by enjoying the sunny day. Suddenly, a man approached and placed a boombox behind them, flicking it on. A rhythmic drum beat startled the girls and drew the attention of the crowd. As the beat continued, a group of passers-by gathered in a circle around the monument and, on cue, began a choreographed dance reminiscent of the Rockettes. The music shifted to Katy Perry's hit, "The One That Got Away," a song Susan loved. She clapped in delight as the dancers performed in front of them. The crowd cheered and clapped along as the dancers strutted and kicked in time to the music. Susan, Missy, and Brianna were grinning and laughing, with Susan clearly enjoying the attention. As the routine continued, one of the dancers stepped forward, holding a poster of a man's face, showing it to the crowd and the girls. "Is this the one that got away?" the crowd seemed to wonder. Then more dancers appeared, each holding posters of different male faces. While Susan laughed at the performance, Missy suddenly frowned, recognizing one of the faces. She pointed it out to Brianna, who leaned in closer. The posters were pictures of the men from Susan's eye contact profile. As more faces appeared, Brianna began tugging on Susan's arm, urging her to look more carefully. Susan's mood shifted abruptly as she realized what was happening. She grew visibly agitated when she saw the last poster. It was the red-headed man she had spent the night with in Boston earlier that week. As the song reached the bridge, the dancers continued their high-energy routine, holding the posters aloft for everyone to see. At that moment, all the dancers dropped their posters to the ground. Then, from behind the statue, Mickey and Beth appeared, holding a single poster with pictures of Susan and me. They walked up to the three seated girls, whose faces had gone pale despite the bright afternoon sun. Mickey and Beth tugged on their sides of the poster, splitting it in two, separating my image from Susan's. They dropped the halves on the ground. The crowd seemed confused. The dancers had stopped, but the boombox kept playing the last line of the chorus on a loop. Instead of the laughter the audience expected from the three girls, they saw them crying and holding each other. A few people started clapping but were hushed by those still curious about what would happen next. As the song looped, the circle of dancers parted and I walked forward. I went straight to Susan. With tears streaming down her face, she looked up as I handed her a copy of my divorce petition. "Susan Devereaux Morrison, you have been served," I declared. As I turned to leave, Susan tried to follow, but Mickey gave her a menacing look, his towering presence forcing her to sink back, sobbing as her friends tried to console her. Beth had the last word. She stormed up to Susan and shouted, "You had a good man, but now thank God, he's the one who got away." The music stopped, the dancers blended into the crowd, and the onlookers stood in awkward silence, the only sound being the sobs of the three humiliated girls at the feet of the Christopher Columbus statue. Mickey led Beth and me to a waiting cab, and we headed to Brooklyn. I briefly considered going back to ask Susan how she liked her surprise, but decided it was unnecessary. Susan tried contacting me repeatedly, but I ignored her calls, emails, and texts. Eventually, her lawyer reached out to mine, and I made it clear that the only time I talked to Susan was during negotiations for our property settlement. After a lot of back and forth, we scheduled a meeting. The session took place in Susan's law firm's offices. My lawyer wasn't happy about the location, but by then, he wasn't pleased with me anyway. I didn't care. We entered a conference room as large as Susan's apartment. While my lawyer seemed uneasy, I knew I had control, so it didn't bother me. What did surprise me was seeing Walter, Susan's father, sitting beside her. I should have expected that, I thought. He's probably bailed her out before. Once we were all seated, I glanced around the table. Susan's attorney looked at me like I was some odd specimen under a microscope, while Walter glared, clearly furious that I'd hurt his daughter. Susan avoided eye contact altogether. Her attorney spoke first. "Mr. Morrison, we've gathered here at your request to discuss a property settlement for the dissolution of this marriage. We have a proposal that I believe you'll find more than fair. Let's start there. My attorney began to speak, but I cut him off, saying firmly, "Forget it." Walter leaned in to whisper to Susan, but I overheard him clearly. "I told you to make him sign a prenup." Her attorney, embarrassed, tried to refocus on the settlement, but I wasn't having it. "Drop it," I repeated. I turned to Walter. "Mr. Devereaux, I married your daughter for love, not for money. You may not understand that, but my father taught me that a man's honor matters far more than his wealth." I addressed Susan's attorney again. "There are only two things I want in this settlement. Once you agree to them, I'll have no further demands. The first thing I want is for Susan to return my grandmother's engagement ring and wedding ring. They symbolize a commitment to share our lives and forsake all others, and Susan never lived up to or intended to keep that promise." Susan buried her head on the table and started to cry. "The second thing I want is 30 minutes alone with Susan, during which she promises to answer my questions truthfully. Give me those two things and I'll make no further claims." My attorney shook his head in disbelief, knowing Walter's net worth and realizing he wouldn't get a share of it. But Walter suddenly perked up. "Will you put that in writing?" he asked eagerly. I looked at him coldly. "In my family, a man's word is his bond, but for your peace of mind, yes, I'll sign an agreement." Walter didn't catch my sarcasm, too busy instructing his attorney to draft the contract. Then he turned to Susan, saying, "Give him the rings. Let's get out of this mess." As she wept, he patted her arm. "If they mean that much to you, your mother and I will buy you new ones." As she reluctantly removed the rings, I stood up. "Since we're all in agreement, I'd like everyone except Susan to leave the room. My 30 minutes start once you're gone." Walter hesitated, but eventually stood and pulled the family attorney toward the door. "Get that agreement written up immediately. I want his signature on it before he leaves." Once everyone else had left, Susan and I were left facing each other across the table. I sat for a moment, unsure where to begin. I had thought about this moment since the day at Columbus Circle, but now that it was here, I struggled to start. Finally, I decided to just ask, "When did it start, Susan?" She looked up, understanding my question. "I guess it never really stopped," she admitted. "Eye Contact kept sending me profiles of all those attractive guys, and I wanted to sample them all. I thought you loved me," I said. "I did, Peter, I really did. But when you were away, I'd get bored and want to party. It didn't seem wrong to try out alternatives, especially since I was sure you'd never find out." "Then why did you agree to marry me?" I asked. "Oh, Peter, your proposal at the Empire State Building was so perfect. No man had ever cared about me like that. It was so exciting, and I decided to go for it. I knew my parents would be upset, but that made it even more thrilling." I paused, processing her words. "So, how long after our honeymoon did you start using Eye Contact again?" "I promised myself I'd stay faithful," she said. "But when you went back to the West Coast, I got bored. Then I got a new batch of profiles from Eye Contact, and I missed the thrill of meeting new men. But I didn't act on it at first because I didn't want to hurt you. Then I had to go to Boston for work," she continued. "And I realized Boston was a different world. I updated my Eye Contact profile to that city, and when I went there," her voice trailed off, and we both knew what she had done. I recalled my first trip to the West Coast after our honeymoon, excited to return to her. I couldn't remember exactly when her first Boston trip was, but it couldn't have been more than a week or two later, less than a month after our wedding, and she was already cheating. "So, every time you went to Boston—" I left the question hanging, and she nodded, guilty. I changed direction. "Did Missy and Brianna know?" "Oh, yes," she said. "We've been together for so long that we don't keep secrets." "And they didn't care?" "No, they benefited too." She started, then stopped abruptly. I'd already guessed what she meant. "You passed your men to them," I said. "After you were done, you gave them to Missy and Brianna." She blushed. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with them. The 3 Misketeers, I thought. More like 3 little cheats. No wonder they didn't want to break up their living arrangement. "One last question," I said. "Why? Why couldn't you stop and just love me?" "I don't really know," she whispered. "When I got to Vassar, I was voted the hottest freshman. At first, I loved the attention and the intimacy. Then I dated an upperclassman, but it got boring, so I dumped him. I realized I liked the excitement of a new man, the thrill of the first time. After that, I was with a different guy almost every week, and I loved it." She smiled slyly. "Missy and Brianna loved it too," she continued. "After college, I started my job in investment banking, but the hours were long and most of the guys were married. I tried singles bars, but they were hit or miss. Then I found Eye Contact, and their members were top tier. It was like my personal buffet, new profiles every week." As she spoke, I realized she was dependent on this lifestyle. as surely as if she'd been hooked on pills. I stood up. The 30 minutes weren't quite over, but I'd heard enough. Seeing me rise, she stood too. "Baby, I know I hurt you, but I do love you. We could be happy if you could get past my need for excitement. It could work. You could even be with Missy and Brianna if you wanted." I felt nauseous, but before I could respond, Susan's father and her attorney returned with mine. The Devereaux attorney handed me a document. "I believe this agreement satisfies your requests, and your attorney has approved it." My attorney nodded in agreement. I picked up my grandmother's rings, pocketed them, and signed the document. As I stood, Walter Devereaux looked at me curiously. "I may have misjudged you, young man," he said, offering his hand. "Perhaps," I replied, "but I certainly misjudged your daughter. My opinion of you, however, remains unchanged." Ignoring his hand, I walked out the door. I got a lucky break. The Google colleague who had been living with Mickey and Beth got transferred, so I was able to move back in with them. They were incredibly supportive, always attentive to my emotions, and whenever I was feeling down, which was often, they tried to cheer me up. When my divorce was finalized, they even threw a big party at the club where Mickey worked. I was probably the only straight person there, but I still had a great time. Despite their efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being a failure. I had lost at the dating game, failed at love and marriage, and even moving back in with Mickey and Beth felt like a step backward. It wasn't their fault, but it felt like I was right back where I'd started. I saw Susan once. I was downtown for a late meeting and stopped by a lively restaurant afterward to grab something to eat. She was there, laughing and flirting with a younger guy. I recognized that giggle. It meant she was feeling frisky. My appetite vanished and I left without her ever seeing me. I hadn't expected her to change, but seeing her act the same only deepened my sadness. A few weeks later, I got a call from a headhunter. If you work at a place like Google, those calls are common. This one was for a position heading network security for a major hospital chain. They were digitizing medical records and needed to address the security risks. What caught my attention, though, was that the job was in Nashville, my old hometown, now a big hub for hospital administration. I chuckled, wondering what Walter Devereaux would think of that. They made me an offer, and I accepted. New York had lost its appeal, and this opportunity came at just the right time. It was time to move on. Looking at my bags on the floor of the apartment, I realized how little I actually owned. I must be the cheapest relocation this company has ever had, I thought. The hardest part of the move was leaving Mickey and Beth. They'd seemed so quirky when I first met them, but now they were dear friends. When I reached out to shake Mickey's hand, he pulled me into a bear hug, reminding me how strong he was. "Don't forget us, Peter," he said seriously. "We won't forget you." I had planned to make a light comment, but I couldn't. "I won't forget you, man. I promise," I said. Then I turned to Beth and saw tears in her eyes. I couldn't speak, afraid I'd start crying too, so I leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. To my surprise, she turned her head and I ended up kissing her on the lips. She hugged me tightly, then quickly ran into her room. There was nothing left for me to do but grab my bags and flag down a cab. Nashville Redux Nashville felt both familiar and strange at the same time. I missed the constant buzz and excitement of New York, but I appreciated the warmth and hospitality of the people in Nashville. Just as important, I loved all the greenery. In New York, everything is concrete, with only the occasional tree struggling out of the sidewalk. In Nashville, grass and trees were everywhere, and I realized how much I'd missed that. I ended up buying a century-old home in East Nashville, in a neighborhood where young families were renovating older houses. Along with my bungalow came a couple of large, old trees and a small lawn to mow. It felt like the right place to be. Once settled, I started running again, something I hadn't done much of in New York. I joined a running club, which not only helped me stay active, but also gave me the chance to meet new people with similar interests. Many of them were women, and I gradually began dating again. That's how I ended up passing a gay nightclub that Saturday night with my date, and we saw a female impersonator performing on stage. She turned to me puzzled and asked, "I don't get it. Why do they do that?" I couldn't help but think of Mickey and Beth, remembering how unconventional they had seemed when I first met them. Then memories of Susan came flooding back, and it hit me that she was the real mystery. I still didn't understand her, and I doubted I ever would. I recalled that night in Grand Central Station and thought maybe Lady Gaga's words were the best explanation. I turned to my date and shrugged. Maybe they were born that way. As I sit on the porch of my century-old home, watching the sun set over the familiar Nashville skyline, I can't help but reflect on the twists and turns that brought me here. It feels like a lifetime ago that I stood in Grand Central Station, orchestrating a flash mob to impress a woman I thought I loved. In those moments, it seemed as if life was a series of elaborate surprises, each one bigger and more dazzling than the last. But life, as I've learned, isn't about the theatrics. It's about the quiet moments, the ones that don't need an audience. New York had a way of drawing me in, making me believe that the next big thing was always just around the corner. But after everything, I've come to realize that it's not the city that defines you, but the people who stand by you when the glamour fades. For me, those people were Mickey and Beth, my unlikely but true family, in a city where authenticity is often hard to find. They saw me at my lowest and reminded me that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Moving back to Nashville was never part of my plan. In fact, for a long time I resisted the idea, thinking that returning would feel like a retreat, like admitting that I couldn't make it in the big city. But what I've learned in the years since is that strength isn't about staying where you're expected to be. It's about choosing where you want to be, and more importantly, who you want to become. Susan was a chapter in my life, a whirlwind of passion, deceit, and confusion. At one point, I thought she was my future, the person I would build a life with. But in the end, she was a mirror, reflecting back all the things I needed to confront about myself. Through her betrayal, I learned what I value most: honesty, loyalty, and the courage to be yourself, even when it's difficult. It would be easy to remain bitter, to let the hurt define me, but I've chosen a different path. I've chosen to see Susan, not as the woman who broke my heart, but as the catalyst that pushed me to truly understand what I need in a relationship. She showed me the importance of integrity and reminded me that love, real love, doesn't require constant surprises. It's built in the everyday, in the shared moments of laughter, in the quiet support during hard times, and in the trust that you're in it together, no matter what. Since returning to Nashville, I've rebuilt my life. I've found success in my career, leading a major hospital's network security team, a job that challenges and fulfills me in ways I never expected. I've made new friends, rekindled old connections, and even started dating again. But this time, I'm not looking for fireworks or drama. I'm looking for someone who sees me as I am, not as some grand gesture waiting to happen. One night, while out with a date, we passed a small gay club, and through the open door I caught a glimpse of a performer in drag, strikingly similar to the shows I used to watch with Mickey. It brought a smile to my face. When my date asked, "Why do they do that?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Because it's who they are," I said, realizing in that moment how much I've grown. Mickey and Beth had taught me to embrace who I am, to let go of the need to fit into any mold or expectation. And for that, I will always be grateful. The past has a funny way of lingering, but it no longer defines me. It's just a story I lived through, a series of experiences that shaped me into who I am today. Nashville has given me the space to breathe, to reflect, and to start fresh. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking for the next big surprise. I'm content with the steady rhythm of life, the simple, beautiful moments that make it all worthwhile. As the night settles in and the crickets begin their familiar song, I realize that I'm not running anymore. I'm home. And while I may never fully understand why certain things happened the way they did, I do know this: I'm stronger now, more at peace with myself, and more open to whatever the future holds. This is my story, not of the one who got away, but of the one who found his way home.